Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Had a Monster Mutation Quirk. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Days passed as usual for Izuku Midoriya, who was 3 years old. He attended school, played with Bakugo and the other children who were there, and received homework, which he took home. Additionally, Inko would spend time with her son and prepare a delectable meal for him at home. Although Izuku's life was good, it will get even better tomorrow. Izuku will finally get a quirk on his 4th birthday, which is tomorrow. It was nearly impossible to control his roiling excitement for tomorrow's doctor's appointment. Izuku's thoughts of sleep vanished as he awaited the moment when he would be one step closer to becoming a hero. "Come on, Mom, it's almost time." Izuku was practically pulling Inko into the doctor's office while holding her hand. Ultimately, the suspense of learning about his peculiarity was intolerable. Inko was attempting to soothe her son by saying, "Take it easy, Izuku. We'll get there on time." Izuku was as excited as every other child in the doctor's waiting room, though, and that couldn't be ignored. As he waited tensely for a nurse to call his name, Izuku was bouncing with excitement in his seat. Given how much excited shaking Izuku was doing, Inko wasn't sure if his All Might action figure would survive the day. Izuku Midoriya was called as soon as a door leading to the offices opened. Izuku hurriedly stood up and walked away to follow the nurse to the X-ray room so that a male nurse could perform a physical on him. Inko accompanied them on their walk before waiting for Izuku to return from the tests at the doctor's office. A moment later, Izuku bounded into the room with a smile that was as bright as the sun, and a happy nurse who thought Izuku's antics were adorable followed him. Izuku sat down quickly, and Inko smiled and put an arm around him. As she left the room, the nurse said, "The doctor will be with you shortly." As the minutes went by, Izuku's excitement persisted despite Inko's best efforts to soothe him. The door finally opened, and a small, plump man with a bushy gray mustache and green glasses entered, closed the door, and took a seat on the chair holding Izuku's test results, which he had started to read. As Izuku anxiously nodded his head in anticipation of the most exciting news of his life, the doctor said in a bored tone, "All right, kid, are you ready for the news?" "Yep. I want to be a hero." "Well kid, it isn't going to happen." Izuku abruptly stopped moving and, as he heard the news, figuratively froze into solid ice that shattered. Upon hearing the news, Inko's eyes grew ridiculously wide. Other than denying it and hoping the doctor was mistaken, she had no idea what to do. What are you saying, doctor?" Inko stammered, still utterly shocked by what she had just heard. It didn't make sense for Inko, after all. Izuku would almost certainly acquire a quirk because she and her husband both had them. As he opened the test results, the doctor sighed, seeing Izuku looking as frozen as a tundra and Inko attempting to deny reality. He straightened up, took Izuku's X-rays out of the folder, and showed them. "He's quirkless. If you look at the X-ray, you'll see a toe joint on his foot. People with quirks lack this toe joint. You could even say this toe joint is his quirk. But because it's so plain, it's called quirkless. Sorry kid, you won't be a hero." As the doctor reiterated the facts to Izuku, his eyes were about to well up with tears. Izuku was about to cry and make a scene, so Inko quickly gathered all of her belongings, while wondering how a doctor could treat a child with such cruelty and callousness. While pulling a sobbing Izuku away, Inko hurriedly said, Thank you for your time, doctor." The doctor eyed Izuku and narrowed his eyes under his glasses as he sobbed. The doctor reached into his lab coat, took out a cell phone, and started dialing a number after the parent and child had left the room. The call was answered by a deep, eerie voice that said, "Garaki, I wasn't expecting you to call me at this time. Is something wrong?" Garaki took Izuku's file and went over it once more before settling into his chair. "Nothing is wrong. But our colleague asked me to help him find test subjects. I found one more child to use in his upcoming experiment. I was wondering if you could acquire the child for him." The experiment won't be for another year, but I can keep tabs on him and then acquire him as the date for the experiment gets closer to the present. Will that work, Garaki?" "Yes, that will do just fine. With the addition of this child, he will have found 6 candidates. Obviously, he'll want more since I think he mentioned that at least 20 are needed for the experiment. Then we will find him more. Just don't let your work suffer because of this. I think your research will produce better results. And depending on what he makes, we might be able to go down a different path. We'll talk later, Garaki." The doctor looked at Izuku's file and smiled as the call came to an end. Izuku had a good body for the experiment, if his physical appearance was any indication. Garaki was also curious to see what would happen if his research and that of his colleague were combined after hearing what his boss had to say. After all, they might be able to create some terrifying soldiers with the help of what they recently discovered. Izuku remained still at home, gazing at his favorite video of All Might rescuing people. Izuku held his All Might action figure and gazed at the screen, tears streaming down his face. Through a cracked open door, Inko observed Izuku, feeling bad that she couldn't give him a quirk. Izuku was reduced to this state after his dreams were dashed. Inko wanted to help Izuku, but she was unsure of how to do it beyond showing him love and acting like a mother. Izuku heard Inko enter shortly after she did. Tears were still streaming down his face as he turned to face her, his red eyes puffy. Izuku gazed into his mother's eyes while pointing at the screen with a trembling hand. Inko herself was about to cry. Mom. Can I still be an HH hero? She asked. As her son sat in the chair, she fell to the ground and gave him the tightest hug she could. No, Izuku, you won't be a hero. As soon as she said those words, Inko stopped thinking. She didn't wish to ruin his hopes. As Izuku was about to cry even more, Inko's mind was racing for a way to correct what she had said, and she discovered it. Izuku paused for a moment upon hearing the words, "You won't be a hero, Izuku. You'll be something better than a hero." He was unsure of how to respond to the unexpected statement. Izuku also had no idea what was superior to a hero. Izuku eked out, what's better than a hero?" Inko tightened her embrace while she looked for the solution. Her efforts, however, were in vain. "I don't know, Izuku, but I know that you'll find out one day." Inko sincerely hoped that her words would be sufficient to support her son in his future endeavors. If Izuku never recovered from this depression, she didn't know what she would do. The following day was the date. Even though Izuku was still depressed over the recent events, Inko's words helped him feel better. They gave Izuku the confidence he needed to try to solve his problem. Izuku might be more than just a hero. He was unsure of the meaning of Inko's words, but they gave him enough hope to keep going. Izuku was currently thinking about what Inko had said as he drove to school. Izuku was scared and eager for the school day to begin because he had no idea how he would be treated. Izuku arrived at school and waited for everyone to arrive before sitting down in his class. At last, every child entered the classroom and took a seat. Mitsuki had heard what had happened from Inko, and Bakugo had overheard their conversation. However, he gave Izuku a suspicious look as soon as he walked into the classroom. Izuku saw no discernible changes, and classes went on as usual. He hoped that would continue. Izuku, however, hoped too late. Every child went to play during break time under the supervision of the teachers. However, Izuku was playing with some blocks in class by himself. But as Bakugo and his group got closer, Izuku heard footsteps approaching him, and he realized he was no longer alone. "Hey Izuku, I heard from my mom that you're now quirkless. Is that true?" Izuku looked down, saddened by the reminder of his quirkiness, and he stopped playing with the blocks. Izuku continued to look down with a sad expression while he said, "Yeah, Kachan, it is true, I am quirkless." However, he was reminded of his mother's words once more. Izuku felt courage drip into him, and he looked up to meet Bakugo's eyes. "And that's fine. I'll do something better than be a hero." Bakugo and his group gazed at Izuku without saying a word. They soon burst out laughing. Bakugo was the first to relax, gazing at Izuku's faltering self-assurance. "What's that supposed to mean, Izuku? What's better than being a hero?" The other boys chuckled at Izuku, saying, "I don't know, but I'll figure it out one day." It all sounded like a silly dream and a fairy tale. Izuku was saddened by the moniker, but he also felt left behind. "Yeah, whatever Izuku, actually you need a new name. Since you're so useless, why don't we call you Deku? After all, your name has the kanji for useless." "You can read kanji and Bakugo?" Bakugo and his group laughed as they made their way back to the front of the class. "Of course I can, Deku. I'm not useless like you," Bakugo said. The class was reassembled with the teacher holding a picture book in the front after Bakugo and his group had left. As the teacher started reading the book to the class, Izuku took a seat with the other children. Izuku, on the other hand, was feeling so depressed that he wanted to cry. However, since the teacher began reading, he hasn't had the opportunity. "All right, kids, it's story time. The story we're going to tell today is called The Great Monster Hunter. Shall we get started?" The title made Izuku tense. It caused him to reflect. As his teacher started reading the picture book, Izuku paid no attention at all. And as Izuku put something together, his mind began to race. Monsters are worse than villains, Izuku thought. forming a smile as his last thought sprang to mind. I can hunt monsters and save people from them. 11 months of time skip. After Izuku was exposed as quirkless, months went by. Izuku maintained his convictions in spite of this, and people accused him of being a freak for being content with his lack of eccentricities. Izuku, however, simply ignored all of their mocking comments and maintained his composure. In the end, he stopped comparing himself to other people. Izuku gave up on becoming a hero and instead aspired to be a monster hunter. However, the problem soon became apparent. Izuku had little idea what being a monster hunter actually meant. The world was free of monsters. Izuku was aware that monsters did not exist. Izuku, however, was aware that he would be stronger to save people in a different way if he became a monster hunter. Izuku continued to have a deep admiration for heroes. However, he reasoned that he could save people more meaningfully as a monster hunter. It was similar to taking on the role of a guardian, shielding others from an unidentified danger. That sounded like the height of heroism to Izuku. As in his favorite books Monster Hunter. However, Izuku had no idea how he was going to accomplish the ultimate heroic deed. Another day had begun, and Izuku was making his way to school on foot. 11.5 months had passed since his quirkless diagnosis. Even though he was ridiculed and referred to as a freak, Izuku was still a content child and didn't mind. Izuku was currently playing a little game of balance as he made his way to school along a white road line. Izuku kept marching forward while balancing on the line. Izuku walked as best he could, knowing that if he fell off the line, the game was over. Suddenly, Izuku heard tires screeching in front of him at the end of the street. Izuku glanced up quickly and saw a white van speed past a corner and head for him. The van was moving so quickly that Izuku started to get a little nervous. The racing van screeched to a stop directly beside Izuku, who had moved to the side to avoid it. Izuku's eyes darted around, trying to figure out what was going on. The side door of the van slid open instantly, and two masked men jumped out, reaching out to seize him. Izuku tried to flee after dodging their hands and ducking when he sensed danger, but he was stopped when one of the men grabbed his backpack. Izuku struggled out of the backpack, a feeling of fear coursing through his body. Izuku was tripped as he attempted to flee. Izuku noticed a squid tentacle wrapped around his foot as he looked down. Izuku attempted to claw his way out of its hold, but it began to drag him back. Izuku was about to cry out for assistance when he was gagged by another tentacle that emerged from behind him, preventing him from speaking. Another man grabbed Izuku's arms and pinned him to the ground with his entire weight. Izuku tried to wriggle away from it, but suddenly he felt a sharp, needle-like pain in his neck. Izuku then sensed a sensation entering his body. As one of the men picked him up, Izuku immediately experienced a loosening sensation in his limbs, causing them to go numb. Izuku struggled to keep his eyes open until they started to get heavy. In an instant, Izuku was seized, restrained, and placed inside the van. Izuku saw a girl who was similarly tied up and unconscious to himself just before he passed out. For a child her age, she was extremely pale and had white hair. Then, using what little consciousness he still had, Izuku heard the men conversing. "Come on, tie him up faster. We still have one more we need to get before we're done for today, and I don't want any more attention." Yeah, I hear you. Just get driving." Izuku passed out just as he was being tied up, and all he saw in a flash was black. Izuku saw nothing but darkness. He was aware that his body felt extremely heavy, but he had no idea what was happening. Izuku attempted to open his eyes but was unable to feel the movement of his eye muscles. Izuku also felt as though he was immobile and his senses were dulled. Izuku eventually experienced a return of some of his strength, and mustered the courage to attempt moving any part of his body. Izuku opened his eyes and moved his body groggily, only to feel as though he was standing on solid concrete. Izuku rested his body and was able to move one arm, demonstrating that whatever he had been injected with was wearing off. Izuku's body was beginning to move more and more. He was able to shift around enough to regain sensation in his limbs. Izuku was able to get his arms under him and push himself up, finding enough strength to sit up. Izuku looked around and noticed that he was with 5 other children his own age in a semi-lit room. He also recognized the girl with the pale white hair he had seen earlier. Izuku continued to look around and noticed that they were all stacked in a tiny room that appeared to be closed off, but he could just make out the outline of a steel door. There were 6 children in this small space, and Izuku also saw a black-haired girl sitting in a corner sobbing and huddled into a tight ball. Izuku got up on unsteady legs and walked slowly toward her, taking care not to trip over any of the other kids. When he reached her, Izuku collapsed in front of her. Izuku whimpered in agony, then looked up to see her gold eyes, which were streaming with transparent tears. As she continued to cry, Izuku crawled over and sat beside her. Izuku made the decision to speak up because he knew he needed to make friends. The girl looked up at him with puffy eyes and said, Do you know what is going on here?" in a soggy voice. No, I don't." Izuku scooted closer to her as she went back to her misery. He had no idea what was happening. Izuku only knew that he had been abducted by some strange men and that he was now here, terrified, along with other children who shared his fear. "Don't worry, I'm sure things will be fine." She looked up at Izuku and saw that he was smiling shakily, which was frightening, but she found it comforting in a way. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." Izuku moved in closer to console her and himself, saying, "I'm Umi Koga." "Hi, Koga." After a while, every child in the tiny room finally woke up. All 6 of them were huddled together to provide some form of defense against whatever was going to happen. Despite the fact that they had never met before, they knew instinctively that they needed to stick together for protection. Izuku had the guts to address all of the children, but nobody else did. Having Izuku near her made her feel better. "I'm Izuku. This is Koga. Who are you guys?" Izuku already knew Koga. This was demonstrated when, in an attempt to feel safer, she moved closer to Izuku and pressed her body against his. "I'm Razone," a boy with brown eyes and hair said, glancing around the group. "I'm Soshu," said the next boy, whose eyes were light blue and his hair was blue. Soshu gestured for the boy beside him to leave after giving him a quick glance. The boy with no hair or eyebrows said, "I'm Tobei," followed by the girl with the blue eyes, white hair, and pale complexion. "I'm Yuyu. Does anyone know what's going on?" They all felt terrible because they had no idea what was happening. After a while, someone raised their voice, and it was Razone. What's going to happen to us?" "I don't know," Yuyu said, her words tinged with more anxiety and fear as she attempted to accept her situation. Fearing for their lives, the 6 5-year-old children sat around. They had no idea why they had been abducted. That was all they knew about their predicament. However, Izuku wanted to verify his theory. The question, "Are you guys quirkless too?" made everyone sit up. They were quirkless, they all agreed. However, it only made them feel worse because they had all received terrible treatment at school and were now going to receive even worse treatment from ruthless men. Some of them started crying at it. Koga started crying, and Izuku did everything she could to comfort her. The other children experienced a profound sense of abandonment, and Yuyu and Soshu began to cry. When they heard multiple loud thuds on the wall, they were all startled out of their melancholy. The children quickly covered their eyes as a wall opened up and the light flooded them. Men entered and started dragging the children from the room they had just been in. The children all screamed as they emerged. As Izuku attempted to draw her back to him, Koga was frantically holding on to her. However, a man punched Izuku, and he released her. Then another man picked Izuku up and dragged him away. Izuku was soon thrown into a different room with Tobei, Razone, Yuyu, Koga, and Soshu. However, Izuku noticed more children his age and thought they were all normal. And he could tell by their faces that they shared his fear. Izuku frantically searched the area for any hint that would help him understand what was happening. As Izuku turned his head, he watched a tall, bald, bearded man wearing a lab coat and a few other men leave through a door. Izuku also noticed that the bearded man had glasses, which shone brightly with his grin, concealing his eyes as he turned to face the 20 children in the room. The man looked down at the children with a broader smile, and they all looked scared. "Welcome, children, to your new home. This is where you will all be responsible for creating humanity's new future," he said. "To start, each of you will be given a number, and please do your best to remember your number. That's what you'll be called here. And starting tomorrow, we will begin your training to turn you all into evolved humans." The doctor glared at the terrified boy who had interrupted him, asking, "Training?" The doctor raised his hand, and the room started to change. "Yes, training. You see, all of you need to be mentally and physically strong if you're going to carry the weight of humanity's future on your shoulders." Each of the 20 beds that lined the room's wall had a number on it. No child moved because they were so terrified. "Now line up so we can give you our new clothes and numbers." Then a girl who was crying broke the silence. Why are you doing this to us?" the scientist asked, grinning as he approached her with a menacing air about his gait. "Why, you ask? Because you're all the perfect vessels for evolution to occur. Quirks are amazing things, aren't they? However, they all come with limits. But you all don't have any quirks. This makes you all a perfect blank canvas to evolve humanity further. Now let's unlock your true potential, children." A boy overcame his fear, became enraged, and charged at the scientist after he forcibly grabbed the girl and began dragging her over. Because the scientist was so weak, the boy's punches had no effect on his leg. With a scowl, the scientist kicked the boy away and slapped him across the face. The scientist said cruelly, "Know your place, boy, I don't want to hurt you because we have work to do. Now let's start giving you all new identities." He pulled the girl to a branding station, where she screamed for assistance while being restrained by men. Izuku stood up to try to do something, but a man told him to sit down and stop talking, and he punched him down right away. Izuku gazed at the girl, who appeared frightened, and his eyes were filled with tears. As his finger heated up and changed into a metal number 1, one of the men holding her down raised his hand. As the man stabbed the girl in the neck, the room suddenly echoed with the sound of agonized cries. As they witnessed the girl being branded with the number 1, all of the kids were overcome with fear and anxiety. After the branding was completed, a man came over and treated the girl's neck brand after she passed out from the agony. Next, the scientist said, pointing to a random child, who just so happened to be Razone. Immediately, one of the many men in the room grabbed Razone. When he attempted to break free, he was dragged over and restrained while being marked with the number 2. Until all of the children were branded and treated, this branding process continued. Following the branding of each child, the children were locked in the room while the men departed with the scientist. Some of the children were so terrified that they simply went to their beds and wrapped themselves in blankets in an attempt to feel safer. Izuku and his group were huddled together. He sat beside Koga, who was clinging to him and pleading with her mother to come get her. Izuku was assigned the number 9, and she was assigned the number 5. When Izuku looked up, he saw a broken, emotionless Soshu wearing the number 13 around his neck. Tobei, number 19, was comforting Yuyu, number 7, while she was curled up in a ball. When Razone was given the number 2, he was sobbing and curled up on the floor. As Izuku embraced Koga more tightly to console himself, despair pervaded the atmosphere. Izuku questioned how he and the others came to be in this situation. It didn't make sense to Izuku, who had always been a good boy, to be here. It broke his heart that they were all being treated this way because the other kids all seemed like good kids. A light glowed in Izuku's soul as he was overcome with despair. "You won't be a hero, Izuku," Inko said, echoing in Izuku's mind. Izuku tried to calm himself, but courage started to well up inside him. "You'll be something better than a hero. We need each other now, or else we won't last. Everyone is afraid, and we don't know what will happen to us." Guys. For a brief moment, everyone raised their heads to look defeatedly into Izuku's eyes. However, they were taken aback to discover that life was still burning in Izuku's eyes. Izuku's eyes were filled with a fierce will to live and struggle for his life. Koga nodded into Izuku's arm and tightened her hold on him, saying, "We need to stick together, okay?" Feeling better after witnessing Izuku's defiance, Razone rose from the floor and looked directly into Izuku's eyes as he sat down. Razone tried to smile as he sat there, but he was too mentally worn out to do so. "Okay, we'll stay together." "You're right, Izuku," Soshu remarked as Yuyu raised his head to answer Izuku's gaze. Tobei stopped patting Yuyu and responded, "Okay, I can do that. We'll need to support each other." After giving Tobei a nod of confirmation, Izuku turned to face the 5 of them and realized they were still alive. Izuku's words, "We have each other, we're not dead yet, so we can make it through this," caused the group to gather closer for comfort. The children's room was being watched from a security room where 2 men were sitting and conversing. As he placed his legs on top of the console and gazed at a monitor, one man asked, "That green-haired kid, what was his number again?" In order to respond to his query, the man beside him started going through every file they had created today. Number 9, what about him? He seems mentally strong, he looks like he's rallying some of the kids together. He might turn out to be a success." The other man snorted with laughter as he kept his eyes on the monitors. "Do you think it's a bad sign? I'd hate to be the guy who has to stop a fucking rebellion of 5-year-olds. However, he had another question. The man seated beside him glanced around to make sure no one was nearby to overhear him before leaning in to whisper, "These kids couldn't do a damn thing against us. Say, why did the doctor want these kids? And what are they supposed to be for?" The first man dropped his legs from the console and leaned in curiously, saying, "I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard a rumor that the doc's going to try and turn these kids into soldiers." "Soldiers? They don't even have quirks. What the hell is he planning to do with these worthless runts?" The other man became quite interested when Ogai said, "I don't know all the details, but Ogai said that when he passed by the doctor's lab, he saw a bunch of vials labeled with quirks. Since no one informed him, the other man shrugged his shoulders and said, "You don't think he's going to try and give these kids multiple quirks, right? I mean, that just sounds ridiculous." They were interrupted when a second man entered the room carrying more files. "I don't know. All I know is he's planning to mess with the genes of the kids. And besides, remember who we work for, so they may be able to put multiple quirks in kids." As he walked into the room, the other two men fumbled, and one of them said, "You two need to stop worrying. It's not our job to figure out what's going to happen to the kids." The new guy looked at him and thought about the question. "Sorry Rayo, but come on, aren't you at least a tiny bit curious about what the doctor has planned for them?" "Well, I am a little curious because of what I saw. Get this, as I was walking the halls last week, I saw the doctor drag a skeleton into his lab." The new guy came closer to the two guys and said, "Wait, like a full skeleton? Come on, this has to intrigue you." He appeared a little curious. The two men exchanged glances, unsure of his meaning. "I wouldn't say a regular skeleton. It looked human enough. But it was different." "Different how?" "I don't know exactly what's different, but it looked like the bones were denser than a regular skeleton, and the ligaments were tougher too. All I know is that the doc kept going on and on about how he found the ultimate human. Plus, I heard he found that skeleton in a sealed-off cave." "A cave? How old was that cave to have a skeleton stay in it?" "Fuck if I know. All I knew was that he was ecstatic to try some experiments on it. Now enough talk. Let's get back to work. The kids begin their training tomorrow, and I want to make sure they get a workout." The two other men resumed their work, logging all the files and keeping an eye on the cameras after the new man left the room after dropping off some files. They pondered what the doctor had in store for the children in order to transform them into fully developed humans. Furthermore, they had no idea what the doctor meant when he used the word, evolved. 1 year's time skip. The children have been abducted for a year. Small doses of hormones were administered to the children the day after they arrived in order to accelerate their body's growth and start building muscle. Every child was instructed to exercise and gain strength while being compelled to learn the basics of survival. All of the children grew closer to one another during the 6 months of this learning and exercise process. Yuyu, Koga, Razone, Soshu, Tobei, Izuku, and Yuyu all became close friends and would stop at nothing to keep each other safe. The kids had to complete difficult assignments every day. The doctor tortured them in order to obtain data on each of them. Nevertheless, the kids overcame the difficulties and emerged from the training fatigued. Izuku vowed to protect his friends and encourage them all as he pushed himself to get stronger. It would seem that the children would not want to follow the men's instructions, but after being beaten for disobeying them for a few days, all of the children did as they were told. Since the black-haired Koga was the group's runt and clearly the weakest, Izuku quickly grew attached to her. In order to be comfortable during difficult times, Yuyu and Tobei moved their beds close to one another. Soshu and Razone were competitors who were constantly trying to improve. The 6 friends had settled into a comfortable routine after 6 months. The doctor, however, wanted the children to grow and change rather than remain in a state of comfort. Newer and more lethal stimuli had to be introduced in order to evolve. Following the initial 6 months of intense exercise, the children were prepared for individual survival over the course of the following 6 months. The exercises evolved as their education expanded to cover more complex survivalist and herbalist subjects. In addition to learning how to fight hand-to-hand, all of the kids shifted their attention from building muscle to maintaining it and increasing their stamina. The children were put in new situations every week for 6 months. Some were gentle, while others appeared to be life-threatening. However, despite all the difficulties, Izuku and his group persevered and soon won the doctor's favor. Favoritism, however, wasn't a good thing. The doctor wanted them to be successful, so they were given more exercise and harsh treatment. Izuku finished third among the 6 group members. Razone and Soshu were ranked first and second. Yuyu beat Tobei, and Koga finished last. However, the doctor preferred Izuku over the other 6 group members. Nobody was aware of the reason. They all believed it was due to his capacity to unite the other children under his direction. Others believed it was his mental toughness because Izuku never gave up. Izuku didn't care, even though he didn't know why he was given preference. If it meant the world to him, he would defend his friends. Izuku never lost sight of his objective, and the torment these men inflicted only strengthened it within him. Because Izuku could see clearly that these men were monsters. However, none of the children realized that the most difficult task was still to come. Although it was a new day, Izuku's birthday had already passed by a few days. Izuku had recently celebrated his 6th birthday, and his friends would soon follow suit. It was unexpected, however, that Izuku didn't feel 6 at all. He changed his habits as a result of his mental toughness, forcing his mind to adjust to the circumstances. Izuku got up earlier than everyone else because it was a habit. By this point, he had grown accustomed to it and realized that it was bad for his health. Izuku had to conserve his strength for whatever was going to happen because he was only 6. However, Izuku felt grass beneath his feet as he got out of bed instead of the cold concrete floor he was used to. Izuku squinted and saw the outlines of trees in the dark surroundings. Izuku frantically stood up and looked around, fearing the worst. Izuku could tell that he was alone in a forest. He was also unable to hear those around him. The more urgent issue was that Izuku didn't know where he was. Izuku yelled, "He!" But nobody answered. Izuku was terrified because he had no idea what was out there or whether he could live by himself in a desolate forest. However, Izuku was saved by his extraordinary mental toughness. Izuku slowed his breathing, collected himself, and looked around. "I'm all alone, in a dark forest with creatures lurking around. I should be relatively safe since this is probably a Japanese forest, but since I'm still a child, I'm good food for all the predators. The first thing to do is find my friends or anyone that can help me survive." Izuku had no idea that the doctor was observing him and was pleased by how fast he was willing to take action after evaluating his circumstances. Izuku grabbed the blanket from the bed and went to look for his friends. He was going to make it through this and keep them all safe. In order to protect them all, Izuku planned to flee with them all and turn into a monster hunter. Later, Izuku discovered Koga cowering in the dark forest, terrified of being abandoned. They started looking for more people who could assist after Izuku located her. Izuku and Koga arrived at the summit of a mountain, deep within the Japanese forests, after a long walk. They were far from civilization of any kind. Izuku and Koga decided that this was a good spot to camp, so they started a fire to send smoke signals and started setting up camp in the hopes that others would arrive. They were able to figure out how to get things going thanks to their survivalist training. After starting a fire, Izuku used it to communicate with his friends in the hopes that they would be able to locate him. Koga and Izuku huddled close to each other as they sat by the fire. Koga took hold of Izuku and comforted him by holding him close. Before long, only a tiny bit of light remained visible in the sky as the sun sank below the horizon. The forest was eventually engulfed in darkness, with only the fire to break through it. Koga, who was about to cry, asked, "Izuku, how long are we going to be here?" Izuku glanced at her and gave her a reassuring smile because his smile always made her relax. Izuku drew her closer, saying, "I don't know, but as long as we have each other, we'll be fine." Then they heard rustling coming from the forest, and Izuku became serious and jumped in front of Koga to keep her safe. However, Izuku calmed down upon seeing Soshu's blue hair, and Tobei followed. Izuku smiled and grinned at them. "Hey, guys!" exclaimed Izuku. He walked closer and smiled. "See, I told you it was Izuku who set up that smoke signal. He was always the smart one out of all of us," Soshu said. According to Tobei, "Fine, you made your point," Soshu, in a displeased manner. Izuku smiled at Soshu and Tobei as they hurried to sit by the fire and said, "Stop complaining. Let's go join Izuku and Koga. It's getting cold." Izuku looked at Tobei, who had some scratches on his arms, and asked, "So how long were you guys traveling to get here?" "The whole day. I think the doctor split us all up and put us all far away from each other. I ran into Soshu by chance as I was making my way over here." In response, Tobei and Soshu pulled out their bed blankets and said, "Yeah, I ran into Koga by chance. By the way, do you guys have your bed blankets?" Koga shook her head as they all turned to face her. Izuku grinned at Koga and offered a suggestion, saying, "I got scared by something and ran away from my bed in the dark. I wasn't able to find my way back." "Then take my blanket, Koga." Izuku put his blanket down over her to keep her warm, saying, "What? No, I can't do that. You'll freeze if I do that, Izuku." Koga appeared somewhat dejected but understood when he said, "Don't worry, I'll take the first watch and sleep by the fire, so I won't freeze." Soshu exclaimed with delight, "I'll take the second watch," in search of a way to kill time by competing with someone. The others nodded and laid their blankets out on the cold, hard ground to sleep. "Okay, I just want to make sure that if Yu or Razone show up, we can greet them." Tobei asked the others, "Do you think Yu and Razone are okay?" Izuku gave him a smile and replied. Izuku's sentimental words caused the others to nod, and they all prepared to go to sleep. "I'm sure they're both fine. They're strong, so they'll make it to us." As he examined the tree line to see what would happen, Izuku watched them all drift off to sleep. Izuku was concerned about his friends and the other children, but he believed they would survive the night. After that, they'll have to focus on living day by day. Before Razone and Yu arrived at their small camp in the forest, a day had gone by. However, a few other children Izuku had seen arrived at the camp before Yu and Razone did. As soon as Yu and Razone arrived at the camp, Soshu approached Razone and asked him to compete in a wood collecting contest. Koga gave Yu a hug, and Tobei approached her, expressing gratitude that she had returned. After a few days, the camp was crowded with children, but after a week, everyone experienced heartbreak. There were only 13 children in the camp, and one of them had suffered serious cuts to their arm while trying to flee a monster. Sadly, the child passed away in his friend's arms after succumbing to his wounds. The children were all traumatized. However, Izuku was aware that if he allowed anyone to become overly dejected, they might all end up suffering the same fate. Izuku's heart hurt that 8 children had perished in the forest, and he feared the worst for the other 7 missing children. Some of the children sobbed in front of the little memorial graves they had all constructed on that depressing day. Izuku was depressed over the loss of their fellow oddball children, and a small funeral was held for them. They had all lost a lot in a short period of time, and they were only 6. Izuku composed himself so that the sadness wouldn't shatter him. The children formed a camp after he brought them all together. They established a makeshift camp with access to food and potable water, erecting small, slender tents against the trees. They succeeded in creating a camp that was difficult to dismantle, but it took some time. The 12 kids who were left survived in the forest for a year, during which time they were attacked almost daily. 4 children nearly perished from a disease, but they developed a remedy for it because of Izuku's concerted efforts and their combined herbalist training. Additionally, the epidemic was quickly contained. The camp and mountain were covered in water when the monsoon season arrived. Fortunately, because they were on a mountain, they were not at risk of flooding. However, the damp ground and cold air made it difficult to survive. A few children almost perished from hypothermia, but they all survived the harsh season because they huddled together and had fire. Additionally, all of the children were isolated in the forest. They all became proficient hunters, trappers, and gatherers very rapidly, which at last gave them a way to maintain their health and survival. 1 year's time skip. In the thin tent he shared with Razone and Koga, Izuku awoke. Izuku didn't mind that they were still asleep because they were deserving of it. Izuku got out of his tent and walked outside to enjoy the cool morning air while wearing some patchwork clothes. Light was just peeking over the horizon when Izuku emerged from his tent. He prepared to start the day by stretching his arms. Since he didn't know the precise date, Izuku believed that he was now 7 years old, having been here for a year. Izuku kept track of the days and had no intention of ceasing his daily chores. A metal object flew toward Izuku from the woods as he reached for a bucket to fetch some fresh water from the nearby stream. Izuku landed by his feet and gazed at it inquisitively before realizing what it was. Just as it exploded and smoke poured out, obscuring the entire area, Izuku jumped away from it. Izuku was a skilled fighter, hunter, trapper, herbalist, and survivalist despite only being 6 or almost 7 years old. A loud bang sounded as Izuku touched down, and several other children emerged from their tents to see what was happening. But Izuku's shout greeted them all. "We're under attack. To war." Izuku was about to say that when armed men emerged from the forest and pointed their weapons at him. Izuku moved at once, diving away to seek refuge. Izuku witnessed several children dash out with their homemade weapons in an attempt to defeat the men. However, the men shot them down, and the bullets they fired were darts of tranquilizer. Izuku knew he would be the next to fall as the children did. As the men threw darts at him, Izuku sprinted for his tent. Despite his best efforts, Izuku was unable to keep up with the gunfire. After being struck in the leg, Izuku started to experience the side effects of the drugs. Izuku was unfazed and pushed his body upward to defend his companions. The last thing he needed was an irregular heartbeat, so he took out the dart and breathed to slow the tranquilizer's effects. Koga and Razone stood up and immediately got ready to handle the situation. Razone threw an obsidian knife at Izuku. Izuku picked it up and stood up to attack. Izuku caught a glimpse of a man walking toward the tent. Izuku calmed down and got ready to fight the man just as Razone approached him from behind to offer assistance. Grasping the small knife tightly, Izuku tackled the man with Razone's assistance as soon as he turned the corner. As he repelled Razone's blows, he stumbled and dropped his gun. As Razone held one arm down, Izuku immediately jumped on top of the man and raised his knife. Izuku moved carelessly and quickly, bringing the knife down into the man's chest, directly into his solar plexus. As Izuku watched the man cough up blood and pass away in front of him, he heard his cry of agony but felt nothing. Izuku looked up to see the men who had ambushed them being utterly overpowered by other kids attacking. Izuku surrendered to his survival instincts and lost all sense of morality and reason. His blood was all over the place as he snatched his obsidian knife and withdrew it from the man. Izuku rose, took Razone, and they got ready to battle another man. However, they were cut off when Koga screamed. Izuku was enraged to see Koga being flung to the ground and hit by darts as he looked back. But Izuku would pay the price for his lack of concentration. When Razone attempted to fight a man, he was kicked. Izuku attempted to support Razone, but a man sneaked up behind him and punched him. The enraged man pushed Izuku to the ground and punched him repeatedly. Izuku watched helplessly as this man beat him to a pulp. Izuku passed out in his final moments after seeing Yu and Koga on the ground. Izuku was upset and saddened by his failure to assist his friends. The man punching Izuku was pulled off Izuku by another man as soon as he was knocked unconscious. "Dude, calm the fuck down." Another man approached and restrained him, saying, "You shut the fuck up, he killed my brother, I'm going to kill that little shit." The doctor soon emerged grinning. He was pleased with the outcome after observing all of the children who had passed out. He saw Izuku's bloody hands and the lifeless man. His smile widened. "Ha ha ha, this one will probably make it. He has a strong body and spirit. And most of the kids are close to his level. I have a good feeling that the experiment will succeed." After visiting each child, the doctor collected a blood sample, being careful to handle the samples. "Alright kids, it's time for your graduation. We're going to put you through the ringer. Men, grab the kids. It's time for the next step." After some time, Izuku's eyes opened. The tranquilizer was still in him, but he made an effort to push it away. When Izuku opened his eyes completely, he saw that he and his friends and the other children were in a different room. Izuku tried to move his body but was unable to do so because leather straps held his limbs in place. Izuku continued to struggle, and Yu and Soshu were only awakened by the sound of his struggles. Soshu escaped and said, "Izuku, is that you?" Izuku shouted, "Yeah? Soshu, is that you? Are you alright?" As Soshu struggled out of his binds, he said, "Yeah, I'm here, Izuku." "What happened?" Yu responded on Izuku's behalf. "The last thing I remember is being attacked by the men who kept us captured." When everyone turned to see a terrified Koga attempting to escape the restraints, they asked, "What's going to happen to us?" Izuku's words, "Hey, calm down. We need to have clear minds if we're going to get out of here," were an attempt to put everyone at ease. Izuku's motivation was to save his friends, so he was constantly thinking of ways to get out. Izuku, however, heard a big door open and heard multiple footsteps coming from it. Izuku noticed that the majority of the children were starting to wake up. Izuku looked around the room and saw that Tobei was looking for a way out while Razone was attempting to escape his restraints. However, when they all saw the bald spectacled, bearded, smiling doctor enter the center of the room, their attempts to flee came to an end. "Welcome, children, to your graduation. We've spent 2 years preparing your bodies and minds for the experiment we are about to conduct. You all should be proud to become the vessels for humanity's evolution. Congratulations on making it this far." The doctor's pupils widened. Every day, he tortured them before letting them perish in a forest. They didn't want to help him in any way. However, the doctor resumed speaking before anyone could respond. "Now, I'm sure you're all curious about what's going to happen to you, but don't worry, we're just going to be experimenting on your bodies. You won't understand what modifications we will give you, but if you manage to survive the trial, context will be important for when we do explain it to you." Uncertain of what would happen, the children all glanced at one another. However, Izuku started to listen to the doctor with a deadly serious aura. The doctor's tone made it sound very dangerous, so Izuku just hoped there was a way out before or after his psycho experiment. A number of men entered pushing carts filled with 3 bags of chemicals as the doctor stated. "All modifications will be made through a series of chemical compounds that will be injected into your body. 3 concoctions will be used to modify your body so it can evolve." The men started preparing the injections as they hung them up on hooks next to the tables tying down the children. The first concoction will break down your body and start modifying it to significantly strengthen the eyes, senses, reflexes, speed, muscles, immune system, healing factor, and body composition. Plus, with your body being broken down, it will be susceptible to more changes. Additionally, the men attached the chemicals to injection-capable devices. Concoction number 2 will be the best one. It will give you an extremely massive quirk factor, so we can add a specific selection of quirks that will grant you more abilities. And it will help partially stabilize the physical modifications to your body. The doctor smiled more broadly, and when the doctor gave the order, the men started piercing the children with needles to start the procedure. 3 needles were stabbed into Izuku, causing him to feel a sharp pain. However, Izuku was extremely distressed and afraid of what was going to happen as he listened to the doctor's words. And finally, the 3rd concoction will attempt to stabilize you enough so the modifications can become a permanent part of your body. If you survive, we expect you to be stronger, faster, and much better than the average person. You will all become the embodiment of human evolution. The physician raised his hand to provide the signal. All of the men pressed a button after he swung his arm down, and the liquids started to be injected into each child. All of the children let out screams of pain as soon as the 3 modification drugs were forced into them. You will all become Witchers, pain, anguish, torture, enduring pain. Izuku was only able to feel and comprehend that he was in excruciating pain. Izuku was constantly perspiring. His skin felt like it wanted to rip and splatter blood across the floor. When the agony became unbearable, Izuku thrashed violently in his restraints. The children were in a chamber, and the room reverberated with 12 childish screams of violent pain. Izuku's eyes went into tunnel vision, and all he could see were his own cries of pain. As he disposed of the contents of his stomach, Izuku felt the vomit start to flow from his mouth and travel throughout his body. Izuku and the other children fell to the ground as the chair's restraints abruptly broke off. As he looked for a way to put an end to this excruciating pain, Izuku crawled around in total agony. He couldn't take it any longer. Izuku approached a wall and started to scratch at it in an attempt to avoid the terrible destiny that was waiting for him. Izuku used what little clear vision he had to examine his arms. Sweat dripped off them, soaking them, as he saw. Izuku's whole body cramped as he vomited more, though, as his muscles and veins started to throb. Izuku collapsed to the ground, panting. He noticed that one child had completely stopped moving. Izuku screamed in excruciating pain as his entire body ached, and he thrashed on the ground as another tremendous wave of pain swept through him. As fatigue started to overwhelm him, Izuku screamed in even more pain. Thoughts of loss started to cross his mind. Izuku was unable to concentrate on anything but his own weariness and pain, but he couldn't help but think of his friends. Izuku knew deep down that he had to live through this for them. Izuku continued to mutate, screaming in agony as he found the strength to endure the pain any longer. From an observatory, the doctor watched with grotesque fascination. He made a hasty note of the modifications the children were undergoing. He added that the agony had already claimed the lives of 2 children. His men watched in morbid curiosity as the children endured excruciating pain. Numbers 4 and 6 are dead. Retrieve the bodies for dissection, and be quick about it. I don't want the bodies to suffer from rigor mortis. They were sorry the children had to endure the doctor's ill experiments. The doctor's intense gaze on Izuku, however, caught the attention of every man. Number 9 seems to be doing well this late in the process. Keep an eye on him. Izuku's number 9 neck branding caught the attention of every observer. They watched as his sweaty, bloody fists pounded the wall and he thrashed in agony on the floor. They questioned how that was regarded as doing well after witnessing Izuku throw up more bile. Days went by. Izuku was unaware of the number of days that had gone by. Izuku only knew that he was stuck in this room, unable to move because his body was so tired. Izuku's only motivation was the hope of seeing his friends again so they could leave this place at last. Izuku was in so much pain that he was unable to see or hear clearly. He was delirious from all the pain. Izuku could only discern that the cries of pain had completely stopped, which he interpreted as a sign that no one had the energy to scream. However, Izuku was unaware of his error. Sweat, blood, tears, and vomit were all over the room. Even the warm pool of blood from another child who had died from blood loss was where he lay. The child's blood had literally been thrown up. Izuku was unable to identify the child. He only realized it was warm. Izuku had been awake the entire time, but now his body was ready to give up. Izuku decided he could take no more of this and closed his eyes. Izuku felt the return of consciousness like a speeding truck. Izuku sensed his physical form. For the first time, the pain had subsided, and it was intact. Izuku felt a wave of relief and wanted to see his friends, Koga, Tobei, Yuyu, Razone, and Soshu. However, everything was unclear. Izuku was unaware of what was happening because his thoughts were jumbled. Izuku just knew he was eager to see his pals. Izuku, however, was unable to open his eyes. His limbs were immobile. He could hear it, though. As he heard the sounds, Izuku concentrated on his hearing and observed how clear they were. Izuku recognized the voice and exclaimed, "What do you mean?" He and his friends endured that excruciating pain because of the doctor's voice. The sound of his voice filled Izuku with anger. He desired retribution. He desired to kill that monster. Izuku realized something about his objective at that moment. Monsters exist. They're people, and I'd like to hunt monsters. Hunting time. Izuku made an effort to open his eyes and stand up. He made an effort. Izuku only desired to carry out his rightfully earned retaliation. Izuku, however, was so tired that he was able to relax and pay attention to the discussion. "Tell me how many survived, and I don't care what you do with the bodies, I've already dissected them." "Well, 4 children made it out alive. But," a nurse said, sounding uncertain. "But what?" Izuku's mind froze as he heard the words, "None of them are of any use." He wanted to know what had happened, and fear started to run through his body. "What on earth does that signify? Give more details, you moron." "Well, we can't wake up number 9 because he's in a coma. Number 5 is unable to move her legs and is disabled from the waist down. Although number 19's left side is paralyzed, he may be able to move with some therapy. Additionally, number 2 is blind." After hearing that Razone was blind, Tobe was paralyzed, and Koga was disabled, Izuku's mind broke and his consciousness became depressed. Yuyu, and Soshu, and everyone else is dead. Izuku's soul was so distraught that it felt like it would burst, but he also harbored a deep hatred that made him want the doctor dead at all costs. Izuku proclaimed himself a monster hunter, and hunters waited patiently to kill their prey. "I'm going to take his head." Izuku vowed to exact revenge. He just needed to be patient to kill the doctor, after all. The doctor and several nurses entered the room where Izuku was sleeping as he was making this vow, read the report on Izuku, sighed at the changes in Izuku, and ordered all of the nurses to leave. These nurses are awful. The only one where all the changes were applied was number 9. He's in a damn coma, but he was a success. The doctor threw the report to the floor in exasperation, but after taking a deep breath, he smiled. "Well, whatever. This simply gives me an opportunity to correct my errors with the subsequent batch. I'm hoping to have the Witchers he desires by then. In addition, I have a year to correct it. In a few days, the second group of children will depart for the mountains." With a sigh, the doctor pulled up a cart full of surgical instruments, and after glancing at the instruments and at Izuku's nude body, he smiled. Izuku's body had grown nicely, with more muscle on it and green and white hair. The doctor was irritated that Izuku was the only success, but he was useless because he was in a coma. "I'll have plenty of time to analyze and research you, at least." The doctor delightedly snatched up a scalpel and prepared to place it on Izuku's chest. "I had high hopes for you, number 9, but you'll just have to be useful in a different way." The doctor was startled and jumped back in surprise, toppling the surgical cart as Izuku's 7-year-old hands sprang up and grabbed his arm with the scalpel just as his hands were over Izuku's chest. Izuku grabbed a scalpel the doctor dropped as he fell to the ground. The doctor was gasping for air and was startled to see Izuku awake. His mind was relieved that he had succeeded, but fear overcame his happiness. Izuku's eyes were filled with anger and hatred as he stared at the doctor, but the most startling aspect of his eyes was the cat-like slit in both of them. Izuku's eyes were green on the right and orange on the left. Izuku's mind was still fuzzy, but he was able to think clearly enough to know that he wanted the doctor dead, so he stared at him and felt nothing as the thought of killing the doctor came to him. As the doctor crawled on the floor, Izuku lifted the scalpel and was about to lower it and stab him. Izuku was about to lower the scalpel when the building began to vibrate violently, red lights came on instantly, and an alarm went off, briefly distracting him as he wondered what was happening and causing him to clutch his surprisingly sensitive ears as the sound reverberated throughout the building. It was enough of a diversion to allow the doctor to get up and flee from Izuku, who watched in confusion as the doctor fled after him, his mind still healing and unsure of what was happening. There was a chase, and Izuku followed the doctor down the hallways with unexpected speed. When he lost sight, he simply sniffed the air and resumed his pursuit. Izuku, holding a scalpel, chased after the doctor, who was frantically trying to flee from him. He heard gunshots and the faint sounds of fighting, but he didn't care because he was too focused on killing the doctor. Izuku saw the doctor at the end of the hall, desperately trying to punch in a key code, terrified as the 7-year-old boy approached him menacingly, his orange and green eyes penetrating the red darkness. Izuku leapt at the door and managed to get an arm in, and the doctor pushed back with surprising strength as he frantically got inside and tried to slam the door shut after he had managed to get it open. In order to gain some distance from the hideous child, the doctor retreated and backed up slowly inside the room, but Izuku was able to get ahead and push the door open. The doctor then picked up a glass vial and threw it at Izuku, who was able to easily avoid the thrown object because he saw it approaching in slow motion. Izuku glared at the doctor, who was pleading for his life with his eyes, as he looked around the room and saw notes and experiments about what the doctor had done to him and his friends. Izuku was furious that the doctor had done this to him. The doctor screamed, "No," as Izuku turned his head next to him and saw an open flame on a candle. Driven by anger and a dazed state of mind, Izuku grabbed the candle and hurled it at the papers on the wall. Izuku's gaze froze in the doctor's soul. He then closed the door behind him, at the kid. Izuku didn't care. He was too furious to consider his safety, and his only objective was to kill the doctor. The wall was set on fire, and the fire quickly spread and consumed the room, producing smoke that had nowhere to go. Izuku walked up to the doctor, who was crying and pleading for forgiveness with his hand. "Please, I am able to assist you. You were forced into this by me. You're superior to everyone else. Avoid doing this." As he was about to stab the doctor, Izuku yelled at him while glaring at him and lifting the scalpel he was holding tightly. "You're a monster." Izuku lowered the scalpel into the physician's abdomen. When the doctor felt the metal object pierce his stomach, he howled in agony and looked into the angry eyes of the 7-year-old who was about to kill himself. The doctor attempted to fight Izuku, but Izuku ducked all of the blows and punched the doctor with a great deal of strength for his small frame. After Izuku's punch, the doctor fell to the ground with a loud slam, and Izuku repeatedly stabbed him with the scalpel while tackling him as he attempted to crawl away. Izuku stopped stabbing and looked down at the dying doctor, feeling nothing but rage as he stared at the man who turned him into this and killed his friends. Blood sprayed out of the doctor's mouth and open wounds as he yelled in agony, coughing up blood as Izuku covered his arms, face, and chest in the doctor's blood. The doctor, using what strength he had left, spoke to Izuku, and then, as the room filled with smoke and flames, he fell to the ground and said, "You are an abomination." The doctor then passed away. Izuku felt his anger subside as he stared at the doctor's body, but then he coughed and felt his head becoming light from the oxygen deprivation. Hearing slams from the metal door he had just closed, Izuku retreated from the doctor and dropped to his knees, watching as a giant hand punched through it and tore it from the frame. When a big, burly man with a big smile entered, he was shocked to see a dead doctor with a bloodied 7-year-old boy who was about to faint. He didn't hesitate at all, and he immediately grabbed the boy and booked it out of the room. As he carried Izuku, this man's voice was the last thing Izuku heard before his delirious mind caused him to faint. "I am here, so don't worry, kid." In a random hospital room, there was only inactivity and silence. A ticking clock that kept track of the passing of time was the only source of sound. However, the silence was broken by the sound of rustling sheets. The hospital bed that lay in the center of the room was moving. A boy, whose hair was white along the strands but green at the roots, was circling from side to side. A nightmare flooded his mind as he slept, tossing and turning. He jolted awake when the nightmare became too much to bear. Izuku's gaze swept over a blank, painted wall. A cold sweat spread across his body, and he breathed quickly and deeply. Izuku finally calmed down and could hear the clock ticking away in his ears. Izuku noticed that it was quite early in the morning when he looked up at the clock. Izuku was startled out of his reverie by the increasing volume of the clock's ticking. To reduce the loud noises that were penetrating his eardrums, Izuku cupped his ears. Izuku was able to reduce the clock's sound by concentrating on his hearing, but the sounds continued to echo in his ears. Izuku looked around and saw that he was not in the room made of cinder blocks where he and the other kids usually woke up. With a cautious glance around, Izuku was filled with paranoia. Izuku wondered how he got here and what had happened to him because he was unable to recall anything. Izuku noticed as he moved about that he was not chained up as he usually was when he was by himself. Izuku became intrigued and noticed that the door was unlocked. Izuku's feet hit the chilly floor as he leapt from the bed, but he immediately leapt back onto the cozy bed. The sound of the clock and his feet striking the floor was so loud that Izuku cupped his ears once more. He also observed how cold the ground felt. It appeared colder than it actually was. Izuku looked over the bed, wondering what might have caused the cold ground. However, the ground was empty. Izuku reached down and touched the ground, and sure enough, it felt colder than it should. Izuku crawled off the bed, putting his hand fully down and adjusting to the temperature. Izuku managed to numb the sensations by standing up and concentrating on his senses of touch and hearing. Izuku continued on, reached the door, and a strange smell filled his nostrils. Izuku recognized the scent. It was the same as the doctor's, that of chemicals and cleaner. As Izuku waited for the doctor to arrive, he walked back and took up hiding in the room. Izuku hid as the door opened as soon as the handle turned. As soon as someone entered, they paused and moved toward the bed. Izuku looked closely at them and saw that they weren't the doctor, but they had his scent, so he decided not to take a chance. Seeing a chance to get away, Izuku cautiously slithered through the open door and out of the room, taking care not to wake the person present. When the person left the room and fled down the hallway in fear, Izuku hid in a cart covered with a cloth. Izuku came out of his hiding place and looked around, but there was nobody there. He could hear them, though. They were down the hall, and Izuku was astonished that his hearing allowed him to hear what they were saying. An urgent, "I've lost the kid," was uttered. A female nurse pulled up the medical charts and said, "Hey, calm down. What do you mean you lost the kid? There are 4 kids on this floor. The white and green-haired kid is gone. I walked in and he was missing." Relax, he couldn't have gone far. His last check was 15 minutes ago, and there were no reports of kids running around. I'll call security, and we can find him. There are also heroes still here, right? Call them. When the PA system went on and informed the entire hospital of Izuku's disappearance, the 2 hospital staff members parted ways. Izuku thought this was his only chance to get away from the doctor, so he ran. As he ran a considerable distance, he discovered that he was much faster than before. Izuku was taken aback by his speed and was down the hall in a matter of seconds. He didn't let it divert him, though. Izuku didn't know the building's layout, so he turned and ran in any direction. Izuku heard a voice as he ran, but it was a voice he knew by instinct. Izuku? Izuku recognized the voice right away. Koga was the one. Izuku stopped at the last second and ran back so fast that his feet slapped the ground. Izuku pushed the door open, rushed inside, and slammed it. Izuku was too overcome with emotion to be concerned about the situation. Izuku noticed Koga's black hair and number 5 brand while she was standing at the entrance. Sitting in bed, she gazed out the window. She heard the door close and slowly turned her head. As she gazed at the 7-year-old Izuku's figure at the door, her eyes widened. As Izuku looked at his surviving friend, tears welled up in his eyes. Izuku ran directly to her, leapt onto her bed, and gave her a hug in return. As they embraced, tears fell from both of their eyes. However, Izuku inadvertently tightened his grip a little too much, making it difficult for her to breathe. Izuku released her, saying, "Izuku, you're squeezing me too hard," and expressed regret for his strength. As he jumped off the bed, Izuku grabbed Koga and held her. "Sorry, whatever happened to me was weird. I'm still adjusting to it. Now come on, we need to save the others, then we can escape," he said. "Izuku, wait." Izuku started to bolt, but he broke off. Izuku stepped forward, but Koga slapped him across the face. "We can't wait, Koga. The doctor and his goons will be here soon. We need to save everyone else first, then we can run," Izuku said. Izuku halted his motion and gave her a perplexed look. "Izuku, set me down." Izuku followed instructions and placed Koga on the ground, only to discover that she was using her arms to support herself and was unable to move her legs. Izuku knelt down to look into her eyes, and his eyes were sad. Izuku felt bad about not assisting sooner and said, "I'm sorry. I should have protected you." However, Koga took hold of Izuku's hand, and as Izuku gazed into her eyes, her kindness was evident. His eyes grew wide with insight. She's grinning. She's grinning in spite of her legs not working and everything we've been through." Koga tightened his hold on Izuku's hand to help him process what had happened. "It's not your fault this happened, Izuku. No one could have stopped this." He took her hand in his and vowed. Izuku smiled as he said, "I will get revenge on that doctor for what he did to us. Don't worry, I can do it." However, he was slapped in the head from behind. Izuku clutched his aching head. Izuku turned around and saw Razone leaning against Tobei, who was paralyzed on his left side but served as a third leg, with his eyes closed. "Ow, who did that?" Izuku exclaimed. As they walked over here, Izuku figured they were supporting one another. Razone stood smiling over Izuku and slapped him again, saying, "Razone, Tobei, you guys are okay?" Izuku grew irritated. Razone smiled reassuringly and said, "I'm fine. I just lost my eyesight, that's all, and you won't need to get revenge for us." Then Tobei, unable to move his left side, addressed Izuku. Izuku grinned at them, his eyes moist, and said, "Izuku, we're fine, a bit disabled, but we're still here." He wondered where Yu and Soshu were, but his friends were all right. The 3 friends' stomachs dropped when they heard Izuku say, "I'm glad to see you guys doing okay. By the way, where are Yu and Soshu? We need to escape from here. After Izuku fatally stabbed the doctor, they all discovered that he had no memory of what had transpired or how they had been saved and taken here. Koga was aware that they had to give him the bad news. As she approached the bed, Koga said softly, "Izuku, put me on my bed, and get them a chair. You're going to want to sit down for this." "What? No, we don't have time. We need to escape," Razone said, putting his hand on Izuku's shoulder as he approached cautiously and slowly without using his eyes. Izuku nodded slowly and lifted Koga to place her on the bed, saying, "Trust me, Izuku, we have time." He then took 3 chairs and arranged them around the bed. The others sympathized with Izuku and said, "Guys, why don't you want to leave this place? The doctor is coming soon. We need to escape so we can plot our revenge." He didn't remember anything because most of the children died after the experiment was over and his mind was foggy. Tobei said, "That won't be needed, Izuku," while leaning back in the chair. "We're saved. We don't have to worry about the doctor ever again." Razone was the first to answer Izuku's perplexed question, "Why? What happened?" "After the experiment, we were taken to a separate room by the doctor. He planned to experiment on us. But we were saved by heroes, and now we don't have to worry about him ever again." As they lamented the loss of their friends, the others looked down and asked, "Why don't you want revenge? And what about the other kids? Where are Yu and Soshu?" They questioned whether they ought to even reveal the sinister reality to Izuku. However, Koga took the initiative to decide that, even if it hurt Izuku, he should know the whole truth. Koga sobbed as she was reminded of her deceased friends. "We're the only ones who made it, Izuku. The others, they're gone." Izuku gradually came to understand what was being said as his soul felt like it was breaking, and Tobei and Razone also became emotional. When Izuku realized what they were telling him, his eyes grew wide. He thought about how he would never see his friends again, and tears welled up at the corners of his eyes. Izuku developed a strong dislike for the doctor who had taken his friends away from him, and he clenched his fists in righteous rage. "He'll pay. I'll make him pay." Izuku's cool head nearly blew up as anger overtook his composed thoughts. However, Koga extended her hand and touched Izuku's cheek. As he leaned into her tender touch to deal with the loss of 2 close friends, he felt all the anger leave him, even though he was still crying. Razone placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder, and Tobei, using his only movable arm, wrapped it around Izuku's neck in a fraternal manner. "You've already avenged their deaths, Izuku. The doctor is dead, you killed him." Razone said, "Thank you, Izuku," and he held Izuku's shoulder with gratitude. Tobei grinned and said, "You can now go be that monster hunter you wanted to be because you've avenged us." Even though they were the ones who suffered the most because they were now disabled, Izuku's friend's support made his tears flow more quickly. Being the only one who survived the mutation experiment unscathed while they lost everything and the majority of the children perished made Izuku feel terrible. All of the vague memories of murdering the doctor and setting the entire research on fire suddenly returned to him. Izuku clutched his head as the agonizing memories came flooding back. The others were aware of his distress and did their best to console him. They wanted to give back to Izuku because he was always there for them and a shoulder to lean on. Izuku recollected everything the doctor had said, the agony he had endured, and the loss of his companions. Izuku was unsure of what to do with himself as the memories took hold of him. The fact that he was the only one fine didn't feel right. Izuku started to feel depressed and guilty for abandoning everyone to their terrible fates. When Izuku started crying more, his friends realized he was feeling guilty and made a greater effort to get him to return. "What do I do now? I don't deserve to be here." However, Razone struck Izuku in the head once more, causing him to clear his head. "Ow! What was that for Razone?" Izuku started crying more as he saw the identical smiles on Koga's and Tobei's faces. "Idiot, you're still here with us. Now go live the life you deserve to live. Go be a monster hunter," he said. "But what about you guys?" Razone smiled contentedly as he said, "We'll go live our lives. That's what we'll do. It's how we'll remember everyone. By doing what they couldn't, we'll live." Izuku started crying even harder. Izuku was still a 7-year-old with an overabundance of emotions, despite having a powerful body and mind and no problem with killing. He and the others needed to rethink how they were going to handle the pain. To defend themselves, they had to erect mental barriers. At last, those obstacles can be removed, allowing them to all return to their childhood selves. Which became a startling experience. None of them felt comfortable being vulnerable. Izuku was finally able to open his heart and mind again thanks to Koga. She took hold of his face and looked into his green and orange eyes, which were welling with tears. She reminded Izuku of his objectives with a sympathetic smile. Koga's smile and words, "Go, Izuku, live your life, just don't forget us or the others. Go and be that monster hunter you always wanted to be," gave Izuku encouragement. Izuku grabbed Tobe and Razone and forced a smile through his tears. He then gathered them all for an embrace, to which they all grabbed one another in return. They all held a heartfelt silence, lamenting the loss of their friends and being grateful that they had survived. Izuku held his friends closer as he made the vow, while more tears streamed down his face as he struggled to accept his friends' deaths. "We made it. We lived but at a great cost. Let's promise to live our lives so we can remember and respect them." But Izuku felt resolute with the help of Razone, Tobe, and Koga. 2 heroes were at the door, listening in, but none of the children knew it. They were Aizawa and Midnight. Anger and pity for the children made their stomachs turn. Midnight asked melancholy, how could someone do this to them? As she attempted to understand what those children had gone through to make them grow up so much at the tender age of 7. "I don't know, but at least they can get closure," Aizawa said, recalling the doctor's horrifically stabbed body. Aizawa pondered what sort of torture those children endured to motivate such ruthless killing. Aizawa, however, was relieved that they could all once more be typical children. Midnight attempted to remain hopeful despite her sadness by saying, "Yeah, you're right, let's leave them alone to mourn. I'm sure their parents would want to hug their kids when they get here." As he and Midnight left, Aizawa nodded and put his hands in his pockets. However, Izuku's enhanced senses allowed him to hear their conversation through the door, and since he had all but forgotten about his mother, it made him wonder what kind of person she had become. After some time, Midnight found Izuku and the others, and they were all returned to their rooms. Izuku remained in his room as a few nurses entered to examine him. Izuku initially resisted them due to his paranoia, but Midnight gently persuaded him to allow them to perform a physical examination on him. When a doctor finally received Izuku's results, he was shocked by what the tests revealed. A doctor examined Izuku with concern and curiosity, saying, "My God. What happened to this kid? Despite the large scars he has on his chest, he's messed up." Midnight walked over to check on things and asked, "What's wrong, doctor?" "This kid's organs, muscles, bones, ligaments, and every inch of his internal body is severely scarred, almost like he was torn apart from the inside out and forcibly put back together to make him stronger. All his senses and nerves are heightened and very delicate at the moment. His eyesight and reflexes are several times faster than they should be. His muscles are 3x denser than a regular 7-year-old's, and his bones are now specialized for durability and speed. His metabolism is unbelievably high, his regenerative capabilities dwarf a few healing quirks. This means he can still get hurt, but he will heal at a much faster rate than regular people. It's like this boy was violently mutated to become a heteromorph, yet it's not a mutant quirk." The doctor showed Midnight images and results from an X-ray, a CT scan, and a blood test. Looking at the scans, Midnight was taken aback. Izuku's insides were twisted and severely scarred. She gave Izuku a look. Although he appeared to be in good physical condition, he was severely injured on the inside, and his body was still sensitive while it recovered. When Izuku noticed that they were staring, he became wary and anxious. When Midnight noticed his fear, he smiled and reassured him. The doctor nodded and produced a quirk factor test that they had performed on his blood. "Is there anything else, doctor?" he asked. "His quirk factor is incredibly high for his age, and when I say high, I mean at least 5 times higher than it should be. But he has yet to manifest any signs of a quirk because his toe joint is still there and he's registered as quirkless. And the way this quirk factor reads, it's almost like he was forcibly given a high quirk factor. It's just unnatural to look at and doesn't make any sense." After reviewing the findings, Midnight concluded horrifyingly that they were attempting to make Izuku a living weapon. She still ached over Izuku's terrible situation, but she was grateful the heroes reached the children in time. The doctor gathered the boy's belongings and left the test results. "I see. Thank you for the information. You may leave, and when the boy's mother comes, please send her up." He gave a nod and walked away. Midnight wanted to know Izuku, so he walked over to meet him. She was certain he was still afraid and wanted to help him. Midnight felt sorry for the poor child when she saw the number 9 branded on his neck, but she forced herself to assist him. Izuku looked at her with his green and orange heterochromic cat eyes, which Midnight had just noticed were stunning shades of amber, orange and green. "So you're Izuku. Do you know who I am?" he asked. Her question caused Izuku to shake his head. "I'm the hero Midnight, and I want to help people like you, Izuku. Can I sit?" Izuku examined her face as she smiled, and Midnight pointed to the bed he was sitting on. Midnight scowled when he heard, "Why do you want to help me?" "I'm not in trouble." She wanted to help Izuku right now, but she hoped that one day he would realize that it was acceptable to accept unreserved kindness. Izuku shook his head once more, asking, "Do I need a reason to help people?" Izuku said, "No, it's just that I've never had anyone try to save me before." Midnight felt as though someone had stabbed her in the heart. Izuku nodded slowly, and Midnight realized she was not making progress with him. "Well, now I am here to save you, and if you stick with me, you will never go through that again." With a sigh, she considered an alternative plan to help Izuku return to normal. To start a light-hearted conversation with the child, Midnight said, "Say, have you ever thought about becoming a hero, Izuku?" Izuku said with a determined light in his eyes, "Once, but then I got a different dream," which made Midnight smile because she now had proof that Izuku was still a child. "And what dream would that be?" Izuku started to say, "I want to become a," but the door slammed open. Izuku and Midnight turned to see a green-haired woman who was crying and panting. Izuku's green and orange heterochromia cat eyes met hers as she glanced quickly around the room. The woman with the green hair immediately started crying as she looked at Izuku. Even Midnight couldn't stop her because she was moving so quickly. Izuku didn't remember this woman, so he was curious about her identity when Inko crashed right into him. That is, until she let out a happy, relieved shout. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized his mother was there, embracing him. "Izuku, my baby, you're here and fine." Inko squeezed Izuku even harder. As all of her feelings poured out of her teary eyes, Inko sobbed even more. As Inko embraced him, Izuku simply froze, but it was enough to remind him of the comforting embrace she always offered him. Izuku sobbed and gave Inko a hug in return. The mother and son were so happy to be together again that they embraced each other. Seeing her son brought Inko a great deal of relief. She had been depressed and felt like a bad mother ever since he was abducted. Inko felt like the happiest mother in the world when Izuku was here and hugging her, which only made her cry happy tears. Midnight smiled at the sight, and Izuku began to cry as Inko gave him a tender embrace. Izuku hugged his mother tightly, overcome with emotion. Since Izuku's strength was choking her, Inko could feel it, but she didn't care because her son was back in her arms. The mother and son released each other a moment later, their eyes red with tears. Relieved, Inko leaned back and gazed at her son. She could now be there for him once more, and he was all right. Inko relentlessly searched the city for him for a long time. She was looking for her baby boy. She was going to seize the opportunity if she could find him at all. Inko finally had her son back after 2 years of restless nights. Inko glanced over at Izuku and noticed that his hair was snow white except for the Midoriya green roots. Additionally, she noticed that Izuku had become heterochromic. Both eyes now had cat-like slits in them, but his right eye was dark green and his left was amber orange. Additionally, Inko could see how strong he was. The number 9 brand on Izuku's neck upset her the most, but she could feel it when he hugged her. As Inko gazed at her son, who was alive and well, more tears filled her eyes. When Midnight noticed that she was about to embrace her, she got up to give the parent and child some space so they could converse. Midnight knew she would have to ruin their reunion by telling Inko what had happened to Izuku, so she left the room with her heels hitting the floor. However, they deserved to be together at this moment. Other parents were crying as they spoke to the 3 other children who had made it, and she could hear them as she moved through the hallways. She enjoyed the reunions, but the idea of informing other parents that their children had passed away made her sad. The parents deserved closure, even though she knew it would be painful to say. Aizawa interrupted Midnight's thoughts by approaching her while holding a file. As he came to a halt in front of her, Aizawa said, "Nimori, are you okay?" Midnight looked up into his weary eyes. As he reminded her of their jobs, Aizawa looked down and said, "Yeah, I'm fine, it's just, these kids. They've been through a lot. And how are we going to tell the other parents that their kids are dead? We tell them the truth since they deserve to know. We'll hand them their children's bodies so they can bury them. As for the kids who made it, they'll need extensive mental health assistance so they can be children again." Midnight received the file and opened it. She started reading about each child's plans for physical and mental therapy. Each child will have a specialized treatment. As for their mental health, the physiologists recommend group sessions so they can all cope with what happened since they all went through it together. Aizawa sighed, assuming Midnight already knew what would happen. I understand. I'll let all the parents know, but I do have one question, Aizawa. What will happen to the kids after they're let out? He said. The disabled kids will be staying for a while. The Midoriya kid is going to be let out soon since he's well enough to move on his own. He will have to come back though, so make sure to tell his mother that. Aizawa nodded and waved at her before leaving to attend to other obligations. Okay, that will do. Thank you, Aizawa. Midnight went to Izuku's room and rummaged through the files. Midnight noticed Izuku conversing with his mother inside. As he caught up with his mother, a slight smile appeared on his face. Midnight knew that telling Inko about Izuku's release would make her happy, but she didn't want to ruin the moment. As she answered, Inko smiled at Midnight and said, "Hey you two, having a good time?" Inko stood up and bowed to Midnight, who waved her arms, saying, "I can't thank you enough for saving my son, Ms. Midnight." At the mention of news, Inko became alert and sat on Izuku's bed to listen. "It's a hero's job, but I do have some news for you. Izuku will be released later in the week. We just need to run some final physical exams. But he will need to come back for a regular mental health checkup, and we will prescribe a good amount of group therapy with the other kids." "I understand. I'll make sure he gets the help he needs, and this will give me time to set him up in school again." As Izuku turned to talk to his mother, Midnight left the room, saying, "Great, I'll have the documents finalized with the doctors. You two sit tight and catch up while I go and inform the other parents." Inko leaned down and kissed Izuku's forehead, saying, "Mom, if it's not too much to ask, can I still talk to my friends after I get out?" "Izuku, they're your friends, and it's not a hassle. Just let me get their parents' phone numbers. You wait for me right here, I'll be back since we still need to talk about what you want for your coming back home dinner." As she looked at her son, who was also grinning, Inko got out of bed and left the room. Izuku lost the smile and adopted a stoic look after she departed. Leaning back in bed, he struggled to deal with his thoughts, feeling uncertain and bewildered. Raising his left arm, Izuku gazed at his hand, the same hand that had killed 2 men. Being a freak, Izuku questioned whether he even had a place in the world. He was transformed into this, he wasn't born this way. Izuku's hand clenched in rage as he remembered the doctor's final words, which suddenly appeared in his mind, "You are an abomination." Izuku was satisfied with having a nearly comprehensive idea of what he was going to do. He's dead, so why should I continue to think about him? All I need to think about are my friends and how to help them. Becoming a monster hunter is a second priority. His hand relaxed and dropped to his side. Izuku felt more powerful as he examined his body and saw that it was more resilient. He quickly discovered, however, that he was significantly augmented. In just a few days, Izuku transformed from a 7-year-old pseudo-strong kid to one of the strongest, and he could sense the power within himself. Izuku leaned back even more until he was completely flat on his bed. He stopped thinking and eased himself into the sheets. Izuku had grown weary of holding back all of his senses because they were all heightened, and exhaustion began to set in. To rest and think about what he was going to do with himself, Izuku closed his eyes. The shutters were open, allowing sunlight to stream through the window and directly into Izuku's sleeping, closed eyes. Izuku opened his eyes and twitched. There was a sudden narrowing of his cat-like eyes. Izuku woke up slowly, lifted himself up, and put one arm under him, but he was tense, his guard up. By looking around, Izuku was able to take a deep breath and relax because he recognized his surroundings. Izuku climbed out of bed, went to the window, and threw it open, letting the light flood the room. Izuku turned and looked around the room. He recognized his desk, his dresser, his hero merchandise, everything. About a week has passed since Izuku left the hospital. When he was completely free, Inko took him home and fed him a nice, warm meal that wasn't overly protein-rich or unspiced. It was a welcome, revitalizing meal, and Izuku had real food. Even though Izuku is no longer in the hospital, he has not returned to school. Inko's desire for him to return to normal life was one of the contributing factors. When Izuku returned, she could tell he was under stress. She was aware that Izuku needed to get used to the city's noises because he was uncomfortable with them. However, Izuku was returning to school today. Following some prodding from Inko, Izuku made the decision to try it. Izuku walked over to his dresser and started searching for some clothes that would fit him, only to discover, with sadness, that none of his previous clothing fits him. Izuku hoped that the school uniform would fit him, but he was too large to try to fit into them. Izuku sniffed the air as he dressed, and a strong meaty smell filled his nostrils. He smiled, and his mouth began to water. Izuku wasn't going to whine because his stomach was telling him he was hungry. Izuku left his room and walked across the house to the kitchen, where Inko had just begun preparing breakfast. Her son arrived and sat at the table when she turned around. She questioned why Izuku had chosen to wait so long for breakfast and was up so early. "Izuku, why are you up so early? I just started making breakfast, so you'll have to wait a while." Inko had to remind herself that her son had improved senses, so naturally he would smell the food and struggle to fall asleep. "I had a hard time sleeping again. All the noise of the city is hard to ignore. And I smelled food, which made me hungry, so I came out." Since he was struggling to adapt to everyday life with his enhanced senses, Inko felt sorry for him. "Well, I can try to get some of those sense-dulling pills they sell. They may help you sleep at night." Izuku surprised Inko by saying, "No, I want to see if I can overcome this first." Despite the fact that her son was only 7 years old, she was concerned about him because she could see that he was stoic. However, Inko was pleased to see that Izuku had not changed in the 2 years since his departure and that she could still see his good nature. With a nod, Inko completed preparing breakfast for the two of them. He put Izuku's plate down and waited for Inko to follow suit before he began to eat. Izuku enjoyed the delicious food and relished every bite. To him, nothing was better than a home-cooked meal. Izuku cleaned his plate after inhaling the food and then grabbed his new backpack, which contained all of his school supplies. Izuku turned to Inko, who was cleaning the kitchen, and went to the door. With the hope that Izuku knew where he was going, Inko waved him off, saying, "Thank you for breakfast, Mom. I'll see you later." The smells, sounds, and tastes in the air were overwhelming, so Izuku did his best to quiet his senses as he made his way to school down the street. Izuku calmed himself, combed his green and white hair with his fingers, and continued. Izuku eventually made it to school with the other pupils after enduring the city and a lengthy walk. Since he was 7 years old, he was in the 2nd grade with children his own age. As Izuku approached the school gate, he noticed parents bidding their kids farewell. Izuku approached a teacher, unsure of what to do, and asked him where he needed to go. Izuku was directed to his class by the teacher, who recognized that he must be a new student. Izuku thanked him before making his way to his class through the hallways. As the teacher announced that a new student would be joining them, Izuku could hear the children inside chatting as they arrived at the door. Soon after, the door opened as all of the students eagerly awaited the newcomer. They all watched as the boy with the green and white hair entered the room and turned to face them. His orange and green heterochromic cat eyes startled them, but they also questioned why he was wearing a 9 around his neck. Everyone nodded except for a wide-eyed, ash-blonde boy with spiky hair. "Class, this is Izuku Midoriya. He is coming back after going through some, incidents. Please treat him well." Bakugo was stunned as he gazed at Izuku's stoic figure, who had undergone a dramatic transformation. 2 years have passed since Izuku vanished. Although Bakugo didn't think anyone remembered Izuku, he did. After all, Bakugo frequently witnessed Inko crying into Mitsuki's shoulder while looking for Izuku. Izuku simply walked past Bakugo, who was about to get up and start a commotion, and sat at the open desk next to him. Bakugo complained and muttered throughout class because the teacher began before he had a chance to do anything, not realizing that Izuku could hear everything he said. Before long, lunchtime arrived, and all of the children were released to go eat their meals. Izuku was about to eat the food that Inko had packed for him when Bakugo approached from behind and gave him a quick tap on the shoulder. Izuku turned to see Bakugo's irate face and 3 of his thugs standing behind him. Izuku made some basic assumptions about the boys, then, out of habit, he sized them all up and raised his guard. "Yes?" Izuku asked in a tone that was neutral. "I want to talk to you." Izuku turned to his lunch and said, "Can it wait? I want to eat my lunch." At that response, Bakugo became enraged and let out a loud explosion with his hand. Izuku flinched at the noise and turned to see that Bakugo was the source. Now that he knew Izuku had sensitive ears, Bakugo smiled with pleasure. Izuku stood up and squinted at Bakugo, raising his voice to a harsher tone. I wasn't asking. Bakugo motioned for Izuku to follow, and Izuku did, saying, okay, let's talk. Bakugo's thugs followed them as they walked. They obeyed out of fear of being blown up, but Bakugo told them to leave because he wanted to speak alone. Bakugo and Izuku faced one another as they stood in the stairwell. Bakugo was at a loss for words. He only knew that the oddball Izuku had changed significantly, not just in appearance, but also in character. Bakugo asked rudely, do you remember me? But Izuku had had time to examine Bakugo and wasn't going to go to that length. His tone became neutral again. Bakugo gritted his teeth and said, no, I don't. Why, are we best friends or something? He didn't know why, but he didn't like that Izuku had forgotten him. Izuku's eyes grew wide as he realized, we used to be close, then you were ousted quirkless, and after that, you went missing. So answer my question. What happened to you, Deku? After Bakugo uttered the word, Deku, he began to recall more details. Izuku eventually recalled the majority of his life prior to his abduction, but he also recalled Bakugo and how he always referred to him as Deku. Izuku looked into Bakugo's crimson eyes and smiled a little. With a sour smile, Bakugo said, ah, I remember everything now, even you, Kachan. He was happy that Izuku had recalled him. So what happened to you, Deku? Did you run away? Bakugo looked at Izuku's body as he pointed out, not at all. I was kidnapped and experimented on. They turned me into this. Bakugo didn't believe Izuku's appearance of strength because a Deku is still a Deku. Bakugo grinned and looked superiorly into Izuku's green and orange eyes. As if I care, you're still just a Deku, he said. Izuku, however, merely smiled and huffed at him. Izuku stepped away from Bakugo and said he would see him in class. We'll see, won't we? But I'm more of a crude abomination than anything else. Bakugo took offense at Izuku's departure and slammed his hand explosively against the wall. Bakugo exclaimed, he's looking down on me. In some way, angered by Izuku's lack of emotion. The remainder of the day proceeded slowly. Izuku made friends with some of the other children by talking to them. He started learning and considering topics other than survival, but Izuku's apprehension about school persisted because old habits don't go away. After discussing expectations with his teacher, Izuku was leaving the school at the end of the day. When Izuku walked away, two boys in front of him stopped him. The other boy, if Izuku recalled correctly, had a quirk that extended his fingers, which he mostly used to pull practical jokes. One of the boys had wings. Izuku felt someone behind him and turned to see two more faces he recognized. They were all members of Bakugo's team. Izuku looked around, but Bakugo was nowhere to be seen. Izuku knew where Bakugo was likely to come from because he was familiar with combat tactics. He could also hear him. As Bakugo dropped onto the spot Izuku was at and exploded, Izuku quickly reacted by moving to the side. After the explosion, Izuku's ears were starting to ring a little. The explosions were deafening to him, but the enhanced hearing was good. Izuku looked up to see Bakugo staring at him with daggers in an angry manner. The look was familiar to Izuku. In the past, he frequently used that look. Izuku was pushed into this, so he knew where it was going, and now he couldn't back down. Izuku removed his backpack and threw it aside, saying, you know, I was going to mind my business and stay out of your way, but I guess that won't happen. Izuku then took off his uniform jacket, leaving him wearing only a t-shirt and shoes and pants. Oh, so the nerd is going to fight back. You have changed, Deku, but I'm going to show you your place. Izuku rolled his neck and raised his fists, saying, and like I said before, Bakugo, we'll see about that. The boys in their immediate vicinity were yelling and promoting the altercation. Ignoring them, Bakugo concentrated on Izuku, who was clearly well trained despite his lack of combat experience. Abruptly, Bakugo kicked Izuku and used an explosion to propel himself in his direction. Izuku's quick reflexes allowed him to see the attack coming clearly, and he easily avoided the kick. A punch that was directly aimed at Bakugo's side followed his dodge. Bakugo was knocked out of the air by the force of the punch. As the boys stared at Izuku's expressionless face, Bakugo rolled to a stop and gripped his side. Rolling his head off the ground, Bakugo glared at Izuku. Izuku raised his hands and maintained his poise. He seemed to be encouraging Bakugo to attack him once more. Bakugo threw himself into the air after slamming his hands to the ground. Bakugo dropped from the air, propelling himself with his hands behind him, and Izuku watched. Bakugo yelled and hurled himself at Izuku, attacking Izuku with his right hand. Izuku jumped under Bakugo with the intention of kicking him as he sensed the impending danger, but Bakugo's instincts allowed him to anticipate the situation and swiftly changed his position. Izuku turned to try to kick, but a cloud of smoke blinding him was created by an explosion that occurred directly in front of him. With the intention of blowing Izuku up again through the smoke, Bakugo landed and ran for him. Bakugo, however, did not anticipate a fist exploding from the smoke. Bakugo folded and slid back as the powerful blow lodged itself in his abdomen. Bakugo was gasping for air and gripped his stomach because the blow was heavier than he had anticipated. However, Bakugo smiled because it meant that destroying Izuku would be somewhat enjoyable because he was a difficult foe. Bakugo yelled at Izuku, "Well, you really are an abomination." He could see Izuku's irritated face through the smoke. His face was covered in soot, and his white hair had some black spots from the explosion. Bakugo snarled at the suggestion, "He's looking down on me again." "Bakugo, let's stop this, I don't want to hurt you." "What? No, we're not done yet." Bakugo hurled himself directly at Izuku as his rage grew. Bakugo's explosion exploded next to Izuku after he raised his hands and deflected his arm. Izuku cut Bakugo's face with his elbow while Bakugo's arm was out of the way. Bakugo was confused and his head shook to the side, but he was a fierce warrior. Izuku had no time to dodge or block a kick that came from below. Bakugo knocked all the air out of Izuku's lungs and planted his foot in his stomach. Bakugo attempted to blow Izuku up, but Izuku recovered just as quickly. Izuku sprang forward, bringing Bakugo down with a tackle. Holding his arms to the ground, he mounted Bakugo. Bakugo attempted to stand up, but Izuku's increased strength was too strong for him. "Enough. Let's end this." "No." Bakugo twisted his hands and chose to employ a new move he had thought of. All of the boys who were around the two and watching the fight cupped their ears at the loud noise as a deafening blast exploded into the air. Izuku was stunned as the sound reverberated through the atmosphere. Izuku was left wide open, unable to hear anything but the ringing in his ears. Izuku was stunned when Bakugo punched him in the face, knocking him off his feet. A flurry of attacks began when the blast was directed directly at Izuku Bakugo. Izuku's clothes were burned as he was pushed back by explosion after explosion. Bakugo threw Izuku back with a final blow and saw him fall to the ground. Since Bakugo defeated Izuku, all of the boys in the audience applauded him and proclaimed him the winner. Bakugo, however, chose to ignore them and observe Izuku. "I don't feel comfortable. He didn't do much defending or blocking. Why is he acting this way?" Bakugo was looking at Izuku quite intently when he saw that he was falling across the ground with minor cuts and that the majority of his shirt was burning. Izuku's hands suddenly touched the floor, and he easily raised himself. He stared back at Bakugo with a look of annoyance and frustration on his face. However, Bakugo's face would be covered in shock when he witnessed Izuku's wounds cease to bleed. After pulling himself to his feet, Izuku tore off his flaming shirt, exposing some unsightly scars across his chest. Bakugo threw blast after blast at Izuku, but he knew the battle was far from over. Bakugo felt pain in his forearms, but he stood tall and ready to finish the fight. "I've reached my limit, damn it. I must defeat him." Bakugo looked at Izuku, ready to fight, but he was caught off guard by how quickly Izuku closed the distance. Izuku was suddenly in front of Bakugo, his fist drew back. Izuku threw out his fist, and Bakugo's chest struck it immediately. Izuku's entire frustration was channeled into the powerful hit, which pushed Bakugo back completely. In an attempt to stop himself, Bakugo flew back and struck one of the boys. Izuku's punch compressed Bakugo's lungs, causing him to gasp for air as he felt them fill with air. After removing the boy and lifting his shirt, Bakugo noticed that a big bruise resembling a fist was beginning to form on his chest. Bakugo looked up to see Izuku pick up his backpack and re-put on his uniform jacket before leaving. Bakugo gasped for air and attempted to stand up to follow, but he fell. Bakugo, of all people, lost to Izuku, so he slammed his fist into the ground. Bakugo shouted, "Damn you, Deku. I'll get my revenge. Just you wait, I'll get stronger and beat you." As Izuku turned to leave. However, Izuku was unable to hear anything because the smoke remained in his nostrils and his ears were still ringing. After being exposed to numerous bright explosions, Izuku's slit eyes adapted to the light by blinking a few times. Izuku glanced at his arm and rolled his neck. He saw that his cuts and scrapes were already beginning to mend. Izuku stopped thinking about it and began to walk home, hoping that his senses would recover as he went. So I do have an accelerated healing factor. Izuku smelled Inko in the kitchen as soon as he arrived home and entered the apartment. Wearing an apron, she emerged and gave Izuku a quick glance before losing her mind. She ran directly toward Izuku and gave him a hug. Inko took a cloth and started cleaning the soot from Izuku's face. Izuku, what happened? Why are you covered in blood? And why do you smell like smoke? Inko exclaimed. Izuku tried to calm her down before she started crying by saying, I got into a disagreement. Don't worry, I'm fine. Izuku rolled his eyes, saying, Izuku, you're 7. You don't need to be getting into fights. He didn't really want to fight Bakugo. Izuku glanced past her and saw food cooking on the stove. Hey, I came out all right, so let's just leave it at that. Why are you cooking dinner right now? Isn't it a bit early for that? He said. Oh, I never told you, did I? We're having guests over. You remember Mitsuki and Masaru, right? Izuku felt deflated. He just beat up her son, and Mitsuki was supposed to be here. Since they'll be coming over, go clean up Izuku. Also, I went out and bought you some new clothes since nothing else would probably fit you. With a sigh, Izuku tossed his backpack against the wall and proceeded to tidy up for dinner. Izuku examined his body in the bathroom and noticed that the majority of his wounds had healed completely and that his scraps were gone. After some time, Izuku emerged from his room wearing black shorts and a green shirt. Inko ruffled his white hair as he entered the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Izuku laid out the table while the food was being prepared. Izuku heard footsteps approaching the door as he was finishing up. He told Inko he'd get it when he heard a knock while he was looking at the door. Izuku approached the door and pushed it open, not anticipating being hoisted up and crammed between two enormous breasts. When Mitsuki squealed with delight at seeing Izuku again, her head was buried in Izuku's bust. Mitsuki buried Izuku deeper in her bust as he tried to break free from the softness. Ah, Izuku, it's so nice to see you again. You look so different with white and green hair. And your green and orange eyes are so beautiful, she said. As he gasped for air, Mitsuki dropped Izuku in response to Masaru's plea, Mitsuki, you're strangling the poor boy. Hey, it's been a while since I've seen him. Let me express my joy towards him. Izuku sighed as he glanced past an irritated Bakugo and Mitsuki and Masaru squabbled at the door. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, Inko approached. After the Bakugo family entered, Inko and Mitsuki started chatting while Masaru occasionally added his thoughts. Mitsuki, it's so nice to see you. Please come in. Bakugo and Izuku were seated at opposite ends of the couch and were not conversing. However, Izuku was listening in on what Inko and Mitsuki were saying. Taking a sip of her beverage, Inko exclaimed, What? Bakugo got into a fight today. I know, he came home with these big bruises. I don't know what happened to him, and he won't open up about it. Since Mitsuki didn't anticipate Izuku getting into fights, she was taken aback when she heard, You know, Izuku came home and he got into a fight too. Mitsuki still thought Izuku was a good young boy, despite the fact that he had changed a little. Looking at their sons, the two mothers exclaimed, What a coincidence. And concluded it was not worth it. Izuku ceased listening and turned to Bakugo, who had just uttered a single word that was accompanied by a growl of rage. Izuku leaned back against the couch and shook his head, saying, Don't you dare tell them what happened. As the two 7-year-olds sat on the couch waiting for dinner to be served, the words, I wasn't planning on it, were followed by silence. That is, until Bakugo said something different. Without turning to face Izuku, Bakugo questioned, Deku, do you still have the same dream you had before all this happened to you? Izuku looked over at him. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me. I'm talking about that stupid dream you always had. Bakugo snorted at Izuku's response, Oh, you mean my Monster Hunter dream, right? I do still have that dream. Izuku was a little irritated, but he wasn't in the mood to argue with Bakugo. Why be a dumb monster hunter when you can be a hero? There are no monsters in the world anyway, so it's stupid. Bakugo gave a furious huff, and Izuku sighed because he thought he knew what Bakugo would say next. It may seem stupid to you, but I'll make it happen. You can be a hero. I'll be a monster hunter. Bakugo shouted at Izuku, I'll beat you. I'll be stronger than you next time. Mitsuki's shout, Katsuki, shut up. Don't yell at your friend. Caused Masaru to sigh and Inko to giggle. Because of their antics, Izuku smiled. Izuku answered as Bakugo sat down and crossed his arms in a furious manner. Bakugo looked at Izuku, and he was filled with a fierce determination. We'll see who is stronger another day, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to try and get stronger. Bakugo stood up on the couch and yelled, I won't let you win. This time. Only to have a cloth thrown at his head knock him off, and Mitsuki then yelled at him. Izuku laughed and felt a warm feeling in his chest as he asked, What did I tell you, brat? He hoped his other friends were all right. Izuku realized what he had to do after glancing down at his healed hand. Izuku clenched his hand into a fist, full of willpower and faith to become stronger. Izuku was motivated by his belief that he could become stronger because he was aware of his potential. Because it reminded him of the pledge he made to his friends, it made him smile. I guess I should start training. Hopefully, I can live a life that makes you guys happy. Isn't that what you want for me, Soshu and Yuyu? For Izuku, the remainder of the night was quiet. He was relieved to return to his regular life at last. He was aware that he would face new difficulties in his new life. Izuku, however, eagerly anticipated it. He would live to remember his friends, regardless of what he had to do. Izuku was going to be a monster hunter, but he had no idea how he would accomplish this. The birds were chirping, and a gentle breeze was blowing through the trees, causing their leaves to drop and float in the air like bubbles. It was a calm day. The sky was nearly cloudless, allowing the light blue sky to shine in all its celestial splendor. The day was a pleasant one for thinking back on life and honoring the deceased. Izuku was standing silently in a cemetery, doing just that. There was a big memorial stone in front of him. Izuku's long, curly white hair was gently blown by the increasing wind, exposing its dark green roots. Izuku's green and orange cat-like eyes gazed down stoically, recalling the brief but ultimately successful time he had spent with this individual. Izuku was reminded of his purpose as he felt a burden in his hands. Izuku smiled softly as he bent down and laid a bouquet of flowers on the tombstone's offering tray. There was no need to be cold and stoic today. It was a day of remembering. After deciding on his course of action, Izuku sat beside the gravestone and relished the sunny day as a calm feeling overcame him. Izuku laughed to himself as he spoke to the grave, remembering long-gone days, but his tranquility was broken when he heard the cemetery gate open. Today is a great day, right? Happy birthday, Yuyu. How old are you now, 13 or 14? It doesn't matter since Koga will probably run over my toes with her wheelchair before she tells me your age. Then we'll all laugh about it and sing you happy birthday. Speaking of Koga, Izuku noticed a young woman rolling up the hill with long, straight black hair as she passed the cemetery entrance. She glanced up and saw Izuku. They both grinned at each other, and she accelerated her wheeling. You're late. I thought we agreed to skip school at lunch and come see our friend. Koga wheeled over to give Izuku a playful shoulder slap. Koga showed Izuku a triple-layered bento box that was wrapped and said, You try sneaking out of school in a wheelchair. Besides, I wanted to stop by my house and bring you this. Koga scowled and tossed the boxes onto Izuku's lap, asking, You wanted a picnic? She pouted and said, Sorry for wanting to eat with my friend. Izuku gave her a gentle smile because this was exactly how she was. Hey, come on, I like your cooking. I just hope you made enough. Despite being blind, Razone's got a huge stomach. Izuku tilted his head in agreement, saying, Why do you think I made 3 boxes? One is for him. I swear he's getting fatter every day. Koga rolled her eyes and rolled over to Izuku's side, where she crawled up to lie down next to him after getting out of the wheelchair. He can indeed clear out a buffet, but we all could all of our metabolisms are increased, so cut him some slack. It's a nice day today, maybe we should do something, Koga said, blushing slightly in embarrassment that Izuku was unaware of. Maybe. I don't feel like going back to school after this anyway. We can stop by Tobei's family diner. Izuku thought about Koga's suggestion while staring straight ahead without glancing at anything. We go there all the time though, not that I'm complaining since the food is good. But why don't we go shopping or to an arcade? He asked himself. Sure. Koga smiled, but as Izuku went on, the smile vanished. Koga sighed and pouted because she believed she had finally had a chance to spend time with Izuku alone. Let's just tell Razone so he knows. Then, as Koga heard footsteps ascending the hill, she stopped pouting. Izuku heard them, too, and when he turned to see Razone's brown hair, he smiled quietly. With a box of food and his black aviator sunglasses, Razone walked up the hill with a bright smile. Since Razone was able to move around normally, no one would be able to tell that he was blind from the outside. Razone grinned and said, "Don't tell me I was interrupting something." Izuku shook his head and Koga blushed a little. Razone's expression was irritated, but then he had an idea. "You weren't, we were just talking about what to do after this." The idea of an arcade came to mind. "Do you want to come?" he asked. "Nah, I can't go. I don't have the money," Razone said, nudging Koga, who became very happy. Unaware of the circumstances, Izuku said, "It's fine, I have plenty of money so I can cover you," which caused Razone to look down in exasperation. Razone threw some dirt that had been mixed in by the grass roots at Izuku. Izuku was covered in dirt shrapnel when he attempted to block. Izuku's expression turned irritated as he gazed at his friend. What was that for? Izuku put down Koga's food boxes and gazed at Razone's sunglasses before he stood up and brushed himself off. "Go clean yourself up." Razone walked past Izuku to sit next to Koga, but Izuku walked past him with a frustrated air. Koga sighed deeply and sat up in frustration, saying, "You know, for someone so sharp, he sure is dull. I take it he didn't get the underlying message?" Since she couldn't get Izuku to look at her, Koga began to question her skills. However, Razone gave her a look that told her not to doubt herself. "No, he didn't get the hint. Does he not like me? Is that why he never picks up on my advances? Maybe he doesn't want a girl in a wheelchair?" Razone grinned as he recalled Izuku's lack of senses. "Well, as a fellow member of the male sex, I can tell you this. We are some of the densest creatures on the planet," Razone said. "Plus, I don't think he would mind the wheelchair if you guys started dating. Izuku hasn't abandoned us yet, and I don't think he will in the future." Koga grinned and blushed slightly as she said, "You're probably right. Izuku is a guy who tends to wear his heart on his sleeve despite being so stoic. That's one of the reasons I like him." Razone patted her shoulder to reassure her, saying, "Then stop worrying about asking him out. You'll get your chance soon enough." A slight breeze blew past them, causing Koga's hair to wave in the wind as her spirits were raised. Koga heard Izuku return up the hill, and she looked up, appreciating the lovely blue day and the life that had been given to her. Koga turned to face the source of the sound and saw Izuku's white hair blowing in the wind, exposing his green roots. Izuku's green and orange heterochromatic cat eyes gleamed in the light, and Koga adored it. Even though Razone couldn't see, he could hear her heartbeat quicken at the sight and sound of Izuku, and he grinned while shaking his head. "Now that Izuku is back, let's eat some lunch. I'm starving, and it's Yuyu's birthday, so let's relax." As he finished approaching them, Izuku said, "Good idea, I was starting to feel hungry myself." They all started laying out a blanket beside Yuyu's memorial stone in the grass. Izuku parked Koga's wheelchair next to her after grabbing it. After arranging themselves beside the stone, they took a seat and started eating the food that Razone and Koga had brought. Izuku took a bite and said, "Koga, this food is delicious. Thank you for making it," without realizing that he was making Koga's heart skip a beat because he rarely displays this level of emotion. Razone, still taken aback by Izuku's display of emotion, simply laughed at the situation while eating his own food. However, this gave him a plan for making fun of his friend. Razone tried not to laugh because the idea was so dumb, but he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to ask, Izuku. Do you still plan on being a monster hunter?" Knowing that he would be ridiculed for it, Izuku simply sighed at him. Razone was startled out of his jest by Izuku's scathing seriousness as he said, "Yes, Razone, I still plan on doing that. Sure, when you think of the word monster, you think of some big, scary creature. But there's more than one kind of monster." He grasped Izuku's meaning and instinctively raised his hand to the number 2 brand on his neck. "I guess you're right," as they were all reminded of the suffering and trauma they had endured while being experimented on and mutated, the atmosphere changed to one of melancholy. The boys nodded as Koga attempted to reassure them, saying, "Guys, let's stop thinking about this, that's all behind us now. The doctor is dead, so we never have to worry about it again." She sulked and made another attempt to talk. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Koga said, "So Izuku, how's school been? It's early in your first middle school year like us, right?" Izuku's face took on a weary look. Izuku took another bite of food and thought about his interactions with Bakugo. Schools have been fine. Bakugo is still Bakugo, though. Even in middle school, he's still the same, always yelling and cursing while challenging me. But what do you expect out of a guy like that? He asked himself. Isn't he the only guy that still says he wants to go to UA? Replied Razone. Izuku hated to admit it, but Bakugo was a formidable fighter, matching him in a fight depending on how it went. He says he's going to be the only one from our school to go. He may have an atrocious personality, but he certainly has the skill and talent to be a hero. Razone took a bite out of whatever he was eating and remarked, I'm sure you can beat him. Koga was curious, so she asked, what makes you say that, Razone? Well, for starters, Izuku is physically superior to him. Sure, Bakugo has a quirk, but Izuku has the upper hand in a fight due to his hand-to-hand skill. Plus, I hear Izuku practicing sometimes, and from the sound of it, he's pretty good. Koga, who was not aware of Izuku's training, was a little taken aback when she said, wait really? Izuku, you've been training and practicing your hand-to-hand combat. Izuku, a little taken aback because he thought Koga gossiped with his mother when she visited, asked, did you not know I was training Koga? Even Razone knew, but that's probably because he comes over a lot. Razone started giggling as Koga sat there in shock. What's so funny, Razone? Izuku, I wouldn't call what you do training. Razone repressed additional laughter. Koga was intrigued while Izuku simply shook his head. Koga inquired about Izuku's training, asking, what does he mean by that, Izuku? With curiosity. Before Izuku could respond, Razone addressed her query. His training consists of getting lost in the woods with nothing but the clothes on his back, a knife, and a blanket, and training while camping under a tree. Razone started to make fun of Izuku's training routine. To get him to stop, Izuku threw some food at him, but Razone simply caught it and ate it while grinning playfully. Izuku tried not to sound homeless, but all it did was make Razone shake his head while he ate, and Koga gave him a questioning look before answering. I don't just get lost in the woods. Okay, I kind of do. I camp in the woods, living off the land, hunting, and making shelter. But I also train my hand-to-hand, strength, speed, reflexes, and everything while I'm up there. Razone started laughing at Koga's charge, and Izuku simply shook his head and sighed before answering, Izuku, that just sounds like being homeless. Razone and Koga were perplexed by that last statement, so Koga questioned Izuku about it. But it's paid off. My herbalist knowledge is decent, and I know how to survive, hunt, and trap. I've also gotten stronger and faster, and my senses are more precise. My training wasn't for nothing. Izuku shook his head in denial, asking, how can you be stronger and faster? I thought we couldn't improve our physical abilities due to the mutations we underwent. Although the mutations are permanent and they heavily affect our body's chemistry, by making us stronger, faster, and more resilient. Our bodies are still made of physical flesh and blood, so if we break down our bodies, they can recover and improve our abilities. Just like any person with a mutant quirk. There is a catch though, we have no idea what we're fully capable of, and we might never know, but if I can get stronger then there's a good chance you guys can as well. This was too good to be true, so Razone asked in some skepticism, and your training has let you become stronger. Is that right? That's what I'm saying, but don't get it twisted. You can't just go into a gym and start lifting weights to get stronger. I only got stronger because I don't bring anything but a knife and a blanket with me when I go to the forest. So I've started adapting to the somewhat harsh conditions out in nature. And I also have to use trees I've cut down as weights for exercise since I can't go to a regular gym all the time. As she massaged her paralyzed legs, Koga questioned, but is it possible for us to get stronger? Izuku said, yes, but I don't know the exact limit of our power, while he continued to eat. As everyone considered the new information Izuku had just shared, the air fell silent. With a confident sigh, Razone stated, well, I don't need to get stronger, I'm doing fine as I am. Koga nodded with him, and since she had no grievances about her life either, she smiled and turned to face Izuku. At least you can get stronger to fulfill your dream, Izuku. Razone stuffed more food into his mouth and said, oh yeah, what's the progress on that? I know you still want to be a monster hunter, but I'm curious to see what you've accomplished so far. Izuku scratched his head and ate some food while reflecting on his training. I already told you guys about my training. My skills and abilities are all good, but I feel like I could be doing more. I just don't know what else I can try. Razone said, maybe try a weapon of some sort, in between bites. Okay, but what weapon would that be? Something too long won't work well since it has limited uses in close quarters melee fighting. I don't want something too short, and I need a weapon that is good for nearly all ranges. Koga snatched up more food and said, why not try a sword? After giving it some thought, Izuku decided that it wasn't a bad decision, but where would he find a sword? That's not the worst choice, but there are a lot of swords out there. How do I choose one, and where do I even get one? Plus, I have no idea where to start training with a sword. If you're going to be that negative about it, then don't get one, Razone said, stuffing more food into his open mouth. With his mouth full of food, Razone nodded to Izuku, and Koga grinned at him. I'll look into it, thanks for the suggestions, guys. It was our pleasure. Now let's enjoy the rest of the day for Yu's sake. Izuku smiled, then started to eat with greater zeal. I suppose that's a valid point. Joyous laughter erupted throughout the remainder of the afternoon as Razone cracked jokes and gave Koga numerous opportunities to converse with Izuku. They all put the past behind them as they ate and just relished the company of their close friends. After eating, they bid farewell to Yu's memorial stone as the sun was just peeking over the horizon and they could see that evening was approaching. After school let out, they went to the arcade, where other freshmen in middle school were congregating. Izuku pushed Koga in her wheelchair as they were strolling down the street. Razone strolled alongside them the entire time, looking at every store and making remarks about various items. Damn, there's a lot of people here. As he kept pushing Koga, Izuku questioned, what makes you say that? I can hear all the people inside, I know you two can as well. Izuku wanted to make sure his friend could handle the noise, so he asked, will it be a problem for you, Razone? No, it won't be. I can deal with it. Let's just go and have some fun. Unbeknownst to them, a certain ash-blonde boy frowned as they entered the arcade with the three mutants. To beat them and someone else, Bakugo told his thugs to follow him to the arcade. As they made their way through the aisles, Izuku, Koga, and Razone were looking for a game to play. Razone smiled as he heard the sound of an air hockey table as they were walking. Hey guys, why don't we try air hockey? Izuku thought it was a good idea when Razone pointed to the different tables that were set up, but Koga interrupted. Sure, Razone, that sounds like it could be fun. The three of them went over and bought a game. Razone went to his side and picked up his mallet. Razone questioned why she was with him here when Koga wheeled over to join him. He reasoned that Koga would have preferred to play alongside Izuku. Izuku also made remarks regarding the composition of the team. Koga laughed and replied to Izuku, this is unfair, Razone's played this before, shouldn't Koga play with me to make it at least somewhat fair? I think two disabled people versus one able-bodied person sounds fair. Izuku picked up his mallet and prepared to play the game. When you put it like that, it makes me sound like the bad guy, but whatever, let's play you two. The first side to score 3 points wins. Razone and Koga both expected to play. Although they knew that Izuku was most likely stronger than they were, they merely hoped that their combined strength would give them a sufficient advantage to prevail. Izuku snatched up the puck, positioned a straight shot, and slammed it in. Razone blocked the shot with his altered reflexes after hearing the loud slam. Koga swiftly thrust her arm forward as the puck slid sideways and crashed into the wall. Koga sent the puck flying across the table, directly at Izuku, after nailing it head-on. Izuku moved quickly to block the puck and send it flying into the goal after bouncing off the wall. However, Izuku blocked the puck after Koga caught it and sent it back. Razone skillfully stopped the puck's momentum when it returned so he could line up a shot. Izuku attempted to block, but Razone slammed his arm forward, and the puck slammed into his goal like a bullet. Izuku grinned as he looked into Razone's sunglasses. Looks like this will be more of a challenge than I thought. Razone's face lit up with a smile as he returned Izuku's teasing. Both friends made faces at one another and declared that they weren't going down that easily. You fool, you haven't even begun to see what I'm capable of. However, both boys lost their momentum and chose to play a standard game of air hockey after Koga stepped in and said, that was cringe, do me a favor, guys, and never do that again. Razone's next move was to grab a fresh puck in an attempt to erase his embarrassment. He slammed it down in the center of the table. When Koga blocked, Izuku threw out his arm to catch the puck, sending it crashing into the wall. Koga passed the puck to Razone, who was getting ready for a big, strong swing, after blocking it. Razone smashed his mallet into the puck, causing a loud slam that reverberated throughout the arcade. The puck seemed to have entered Izuku's goal as it zipped across the table. Izuku, however, had already arrived and was ready for the attack. When Razone and Koga heard the point sound without realizing it, they checked the score and saw that Izuku had won. The two noticed Izuku grinning at them as they turned to face him. Razone became irate with Izuku and yelled, "If you guys couldn't see that coming, then you're out of practice." Picking up the puck, Razone slammed it onto the table and said, "We have the same mutations. I'll show you we're not that different." Then, expecting Izuku to be blind to this, he swung his arm forward as quickly as he could manage. The puck flew in the direction of Izuku's goal as an even louder slam reverberated throughout the arcade. Izuku, however, once again defied the odds by blocking the puck, but it blasted back at the two. Izuku was on one side of the table when Koga took advantage of the situation to shoot the puck sideways. Koga shot it at the same corner again, but Izuku tracked the puck's path and slammed it back at him. Razone realized and was ready to score a point from Izuku using the other corner. "We'll defeat him with strategy if we can't defeat him with skill." Koga prepared to pass to Razone after noticing his readiness. Koga finally made contact as the puck sped back toward her. She quickly handed it to Razone, who was already extending his arm. Razone's mallet slammed into the puck. The plastic disc swiftly veered off course and sped toward Izuku's side's opposite corner. Izuku was aware that he wouldn't make it to the opposite side in time to block. However, his body was already in motion, which allowed his mind to formulate a strategy. Izuku made a sudden move, sliding his mallet across the table and successfully knocking the puck off course. The puck was knocked back into the wall after striking the goal's edge. After grabbing his mallet and running to the other side of the table, Izuku slammed the puck into the wall across from him to create a zigzag. The puck entered the duo's goal after sliding across the table quickly enough for Koga to miss her block. Izuku now had the advantage in the game, but Razone and Koga were too stunned by Izuku's accurate mallet slide to give a damn. Razone said, "Dude, that was so fucking cool." He may not have witnessed it, but he could hear the noises made by Izuku and the mallet as it struck the puck. Koga said, somewhat surprised, "That was impressive, Izuku, how did you know that would work?" "I just did what I thought would work. It was a risky throw, so I guess I just got lucky. If I missed my toss, then you guys would be the ones with the advantage." As he removed the puck and placed it on the table for match point, Razone gave him a compliment, saying, "That was more than luck, and you know that." Izuku gripped his mallet and prepared to end the game, saying, "Then prove me wrong." Razone blasted the puck away in response to Izuku's taunt. Izuku stopped the puck as it was headed directly for the corner, sending it flying back at the two. Koga hit the puck as hard as she could and blocked it in a flash. It was difficult for the average person to follow the puck's movements as it flew across the table and bounced off both walls. Izuku, however, was not an ordinary individual. Izuku was able to easily follow the puck's movements and threw out his arm to hit it back at the two. The puck slid across the table with tremendous speed and a straight shot at the goal after a quick hit. When Razone heard the puck, he attempted to block it, but Izuku struck it too quickly. The puck was past Razone by the time his mallet found its position. Despite Koga's best efforts to keep the goal safe, Izuku won because his hit sent the puck flying into the goal. The game was won by Izuku when the buzzer sounded. He glanced at his friends, who were upset that they had lost, with a faint smirk on his face. However, they were taken aback by Izuku's enhanced skills. Koga put down her mallet and wheeled over to Izuku, saying, "You weren't kidding when you said you were training Izuku." After putting away his mallet, Razone approached them and wrapped Izuku in his arm. Izuku simply shook his head and gripped Koga's wheelchair handles, saying, "That was an impressive show of skill, Izuku. I guess I got some catching up to do." Izuku pushed Koga and said, "Is there anything else you guys want to try?" Koga exclaimed, "We're at an arcade. There are plenty of things for us to do here," as she took in all the games. Koga wanted to take some photos with her friends after spotting a photo booth while the three of them were strolling. Razone halted before he could enter the booth, but Izuku and Koga did. In addition to wanting to allow them to take some photos together, he heard something over the cacophony of the arcade. Izuku turned to his friend and said, "Razone, aren't you going to join us?" However, Razone grinned at Izuku while glancing at him through his sunglasses. Izuku looked at Razone and simply accepted that he wanted to do something different. "Nah, you and Koga take some pictures, I want to try something first. After you guys are done, I'll meet you over at the coin pusher machines." The fact that Razone would rather gamble than take photos with his friends deflated him after he saw him approach the gambling corner. As Izuku closed the curtains, Razone waved to the two and said, "Okay, we'll meet you over there. try not to lose all your chump change to those machines. Before leaving. When Razone heard the curtains close, he paused and moved to lean against a wall. Leaning, he trained his ears to listen to his environment. Razone made every effort to tune out the other sounds, but his highly developed hearing made it difficult to pick out particular sounds over the cacophony. Luckily, the noises he desired to hear were loud. Razone heard a loud, "fuck," in the distance and recognized it right away as the voice of the person he had heard earlier, who was pursuing the trio. Why must that asshole be here? Why did he have to pick today out of all the days he could irritate us? Razone heard 3 boys walking in that direction. Razone inferred from the sounds of their footsteps that one of the boys was lanky and the other heavy-set. However, as one boy became enraged over losing money to a gambling game, Razone also heard micro-explosions. Razone winced as soon as he heard the explosions and wished he could keep Bakugo away from Izuku while Koga spent some time with him. Razone wanted to watch Bakugo, the explosive teenager, but he wanted to avoid him now that he was here. He wanted to gamble, though. Razone went to the machines on the opposite side of Bakugo and took out some coins to use, ignoring the teenager. Razone inserted some coins and started to play, losing his first turn. Razone sighed and took out another coin to insert, but he was stopped before he could do so by a hand gripping his shoulder. He jumped back and pulled his shoulder away, looking surprised that his guard wasn't up. However, Razone was also annoyed that it was hard to hear people approaching him from the arcade noises. Razone sniffed the air and listened intently, identifying the scent and the steps as Bakugo. Razone was thinking incoherently as he attempted to decipher Bakugo's strategy for ambushing him. He should have heard Bakugo's approach despite the arcade's loudness. Razone reasoned that his scent was obscured by the smoke from his explosions, and that the loud noises muffled his footsteps. Despite his curious expression, Bakugo chose to ignore it and tell Razone how much of a scam these machines were. "Hey, dude, just wanted to tell you that these machines are rigged. I've never seen anyone win anything, so your coin is better used elsewhere." Razone gave Bakugo a questioning look, but assumed he was being honest. What justifies Bakugo's deception? Razone turned away from the teenager, but Bakugo stopped him. "Thanks for the heads up, I'll consider it." "Hang on, do I know you? I feel like I've seen you before." Razone attempted to leave, but Bakugo blocked his path with a smile spreading across his face. "I've never seen you, so I doubt that you know me." Bakugo approached Razone to threaten him, saying, "Yeah, I do know you. You're the guy who always wears sunglasses when hanging around Deku. I thought you were with him and his bitch. If you're over here, then where is the dipshit? Is he fucking her in her chair?" Someone appeared just as Razone was about to try to rush past Bakugo. Everyone turned to watch Izuku push an embarrassed Koga in her wheelchair as she approached, and she happened to hear everything Bakugo said. "Bakugo, what are you doing to my friend?" they all asked. Bakugo wanted nothing more than to fight Izuku, and he glared at him. Bakugo approached Izuku with a menacing grin and said, "Well, it looks like I won't have to search anymore. Come on, Deku, you and me, one-on-one. It's time we figured out which one of us is stronger." However, Izuku was unfazed by his bravado and instead reverted to his stoic demeanor while observing Bakugo. "Bakugo, we've done this multiple times now, can't you give it a rest?" Izuku sighed at Bakugo's desire to fight, saying, "No. We're tied, 5 wins each. I've been training to get stronger. This time I will beat you and claim to be the stronger one." Bakugo has been preoccupied with demonstrating his strength ever since their first altercation as children. "Bakugo, is there a need to do this? You've beaten me 5 times, and I've won 5 times. I'd say we're pretty even when it comes to strength." Bakugo shocked everyone with his declaration, "Shut up. Every time I've won, you were holding back. I want a true fight. I'm stronger now, so I can beat you." Izuku, however, was unfazed. Izuku, wearing a stoic, icy face, dropped Koga's wheelchair and approached Bakugo. "Are you sure you want this fight? We're middle school first years, why not push this fight back?" Bakugo pointed at Izuku and screamed, "Because that just won't work. I need to prove myself right now." Who gazed at the blonde teenager before deciding. Izuku finally gave in and said, "Fine, got a place where you want to fight." Bakugo grinned as Izuku accepted his challenge. Izuku followed Bakugo as he grinned harshly and said, "There's a trash-covered beach close by we can use, no one will know we're there." However, Izuku turned to his friends before he left entirely. Razone approached Koga and took hold of her wheelchair handlebars, saying, "You guys go home, I don't know how long this will take." Koga grinned at Izuku and responded, "No way, man, you're about to go fight, I want to watch." Razone started to move. As they started to follow Bakugo, Koga said, "I want to be there to support you, Izuku. Will you let us come?" They followed Bakugo, and Izuku waited for them before walking with them. "I can't think of any reason to stop you guys from coming. Just make sure you wear ear protection when Bakugo and I fight. It will get loud." Following a brief stroll, the group reached Dagoba Beach. Mounds of trash were visible to Izuku, awaiting pickup. It was absurd to refer to this dump as a beach because there was hardly any sand to be seen. Only a few trash mounds separated it from being referred to as a landfill. Izuku kept up with Bakugo until they reached a section of the beach that was reasonably clear. Every surface was still covered in trash, but there was still enough space to fight. Izuku moved to the opposite side, while Bakugo moved to one side. Razone and Koga remained by Izuku's side, but they were shielded by some trash near the area's edge. Bakugo's thugs moved to his side and took a seat, anticipating the start of the battle. Bakugo took off his shirt to reveal a tank top and started to stretch his arms and legs. Izuku removed his jacket and shoes with a sigh. The two teenagers stared at each other after taking off their superfluous clothing. A growling frown and angry eyes appeared on Bakugo's face. Izuku looked down at Bakugo with a neutral expression, his orange and green cat eyes cold and focused. Izuku cautioned Bakugo, "Remember, you wanted this fight," as he assumed a fighting stance, one hand out in front of him and the other balled into a fist at his chest. With a sigh, Bakugo withdrew his hands, preparing to strike Izuku. Koga stopped breathing in anticipation because of the tension in the air. Razone halted his movement and listened intently to the fight. Based on Izuku's noises, he appeared composed. Bakugo blew up the ground and launched himself at Izuku based only on instinct. Izuku saw the attack and rolled to the side. Bakugo swerved and hurled himself upward into an arc as Izuku rolled. Izuku was kneeling when he heard the second explosion and looked up to see Bakugo's shoe approaching his face. Izuku barely had time to shift his head out of the way, but as he pulled away, his cheek was struck. Bakugo landed and slid to a stop as he flew past Izuku, his eyes glaring at him. Izuku got to his feet, squinted at Bakugo, and smiled. Bakugo smiled back, watching the love tap he gave Izuku slowly heal. "You've gotten faster, and you started incorporating more leg attacks into your strategy, which gives you more speed for a linear attack. Interesting. Nah, you've just gotten slower, Deku." Bakugo grinned broadly and stood up for another blow. Izuku finished his sentence and rushed directly toward Bakugo, saying, "At least let me attack first, then judge me." Bakugo lifted his hands and was about to detonate when Izuku suddenly appeared in front of him, his fist aimed directly at Bakugo's face. That's quick. With no other option, Bakugo launched himself into the air to avoid Izuku's blow. When Izuku looked up, Bakugo was kicking quickly at him. Izuku quickly sidestepped Bakugo's kick and used a spin kick to turn around. Izuku's leg swatted Bakugo away after he landed. Bakugo slammed into the trash and attempted to stand up, but Izuku was already there, his fist clenched. Bakugo hurled Izuku back with a huge explosion as he swiftly raised his arms. Bakugo got up and exploited Izuku's hearing loss after noticing that he was struggling to cope with the loud explosion sound. Bakugo leapt to Izuku and gave him a body slam that sent him tumbling across the floor. Izuku got up to try to reorient himself, but Bakugo kneed him in the face and then followed up with another explosion to keep Izuku's mind in a daze. In order to keep Izuku disoriented, Bakugo continued to launch explosions in a barrage of attacks. Bakugo rushed in again, ready to unleash his most powerful blast yet to eliminate Izuku. Bakugo held out an open hand, ready to light his perspiration and end this battle. However, Izuku's hand appeared through the smoke. Izuku twisted Bakugo's palm upward and clamped down on his forearm. A huge explosion sent a shockwave through the earth, launching upward. Bakugo turned to face Izuku, who was staring at him with green and orange eyes, but his ears were bleeding. Bakugo winced at the pressure as Izuku clamped down on his forearm and said, "Found you." Izuku suddenly thrust his palm into Bakugo's stomach, causing him to momentarily jump into the air. Bakugo attempted to breathe, but Izuku brought his back and threw it into his stomach, causing him to jump once more. Izuku pulled his arm back and pushed it into Bakugo's stomach several times, making him gasp for air as he did so with blinding speed. After pounding Bakugo with his palm strikes, Izuku released Bakugo's arm and quickly whirled around, kicking Bakugo in the stomach. Izuku kicked Bakugo across the floor with such force that he tumbled until he stopped. Izuku watched Bakugo take a huge breath after the kick, then grabbed his head and wiped the blood from his ears. Bakugo took a few breaths and got to his feet, but he hunched over in agony, clutching his stomach. Fuck it. This time, he's not holding back. I've already reached my limit after those hits. I have one more chance. I must strike him with all of my speed in the hopes that my speed will outpace his reflexes. Okay, let's get started. Immediately dropping to his knees, Bakugo threw his foot at Izuku, pointed his palms behind him, and shot himself like a rocket. Izuku saw the last-ditch strategy coming and foresaw it right away. Izuku swiftly shifted to the side, flexing and extending his arm fully. Bakugo was moving too quickly to change course by the time he realized the attack had occurred. Izuku lost all of his momentum when Bakugo crashed into his rock-solid arm bar, causing him to flip in midair and land on his face. Izuku approached Bakugo and knelt down to examine him as he collapsed on his back following the face plant. Izuku gave Bakugo a shoulder pat and grinned a little. Bakugo wanted to curse at Izuku, but his chest ached too much to even form words. You almost had me, but once I got my hands on you, it was all over. Maybe next time you'll get me. Bakugo chose to ignore Izuku by simply turning his head and closing his eyes. Izuku approached Razone and Koga, who were cupping their ears, feeling certain that the fight was over. Izuku accepted a rag from Koga after he saw the blood dripping from his ears. In an attempt to get rid of all the blood and grime, Izuku wiped his face and ears. He then threw the rag into a pile of trash. The three friends did not speak to one another. They wanted their ears to readjust so they could talk after the noisy battle. Izuku just put on his shoes and jacket again and started pushing Koga's wheelchair. Before leaving the trash-filled beach, Izuku paused and gave Bakugo a quick look as the three of them left the dump. As they strolled through the streets, the amiable trio noticed that the sun was about to set. After a while, the ringing in their ears stopped, and they were able to hear much better. Razone used this as an opportunity to talk. Izuku simply sighed as Koga seconded the statement, "Man, why is Bakugo such an ass? I get that he's skilled, but he doesn't need to be a dick." Koga shook her head at Izuku, saying, "He's not so bad. Yeah, he's bloodthirsty and rude, but you can't deny that he has the skills necessary to be a hero." She didn't want Izuku to ignore Bakugo's awful behavior. Izuku looked at Koga and realized she was correct, but he wasn't about to give up on Bakugo just yet. "I don't doubt that Bakugo has skill, but should you tolerate that kind of behavior from him, Izuku? He keeps challenging you, and he won't stop until he's had enough. You're right that he has issues. It would be wonderful if he stopped challenging me and started acting like a good guy. But I know that won't happen after he gets what he wants. You can't just force a man to change, you must carefully guide him down the right path. And I want to help Bakugo, so I'm doing my best to guide him down the right path without having to directly tell him to change. I mean, look how far he's come. There was less screaming this time around, that's good progress. This will take time, so just bear with it." Notwithstanding Izuku's icy and stoic demeanor, Razone and Koga sighed in response to his statement. Koga admired Izuku's stubbornness because it allowed him to never give up, and he still had a strong concern for other people. Koga grinned and said, "That's just like you, Izuku. Always wanting to help those around you. No wonder you want to be a monster hunter." Izuku noticed the smile and questioned why she had said it. With a stoic expression on his face, Izuku declared, "A monster hunter protects everyone without them knowing. There is no glory or praise to be had if you're a monster hunter, and that's why I want to be one. That is the truest form of being a hero." Koga and Razone were slightly more respectful of Izuku after he made that claim. Razone grinned as he walked right beside his best friend and gave him a shoulder slap, saying, "Yep, you're still the same guy that saved us when we were locked away. Never change, Izuku." Koga and Razone had to board their trains to return home, so the three of them walked to a train station. Izuku waved them off as they boarded their train, and Razone started pushing Koga in her wheelchair. Izuku and his two companions watched the train depart. He felt alone when he watched them go. Among the closest people he had ever known were Razone and Koga. There was Tobei, Of course, but he didn't go out as much as Koga and Razone did. Instead, they would all typically hang out at Tobei's house. However, Izuku hasn't spent a lot of time with his friends lately. It makes sense because it's difficult to constantly meet up because they all live in different places. The fact that Izuku frequently isolates himself in the mountains for training added to this sense of loneliness. They all made an effort to get together on days like today, of course, but it was becoming more and more difficult. Additionally, Izuku felt that they were in a sad mood today, and he suspected he knew why. I guess we all feel like we don't belong here or anywhere. After all, we weren't born with quirks, and even people with quirks are still treated differently because of their physical disabilities. They have more of a right to feel lonely than I do. So I should stop my self-loathing and be there for them. I could sense their distress at being disabled in this super-powered society. I wish I could help them in a more meaningful way, but all I can do is keep supporting them. Izuku let out one last sigh, stuffed his hands in his pockets, and turned to walk out of the train station. His thoughts were constantly focused on his friends. He wanted to support them but needed to keep it a secret. If Koga, Razone, or Tobei discovered that Izuku was constantly concerned about them, they would stop him right away and tell him to focus only on himself. Izuku walked home past several stores and people, saying, "How can I only worry about myself when you guys are all my best friends? It's the right choice to help you all in any way I can." He was thinking about how he could support his friends, and Izuku thought he had a solution. Maybe they all feel like they can't do anything meaningful. Koga is stuck in a wheelchair, so she must feel like she takes up space. Razone can't do much if he can't hear, and Tobei is always stuck in one place paralyzed, which makes him the cashier at his family's diner. What I need to do is make it so they feel like they're important, but I can't just push them into it, or else it will have the opposite effect. If I find something that only they can do, it should bring some light back into their lives. Satisfied with his conclusion, Izuku felt his slitted pupils spread wider to adapt to the approaching darkness, and he held his head high, letting his white hair shine in the last of the evening sunlight. As Izuku kept walking, he noticed that his thoughts were shifting from his friends to his training, more especially, the prospect of enrolling in sword weapons training. My physical capabilities and hand-to-hand combat skills will improve if I keep training as I usually do. But since my knife skills are limited, I know that won't be sufficient in the future. The others were correct when they said that a sword would be the best weapon for me, and I need to improve my abilities. I simply don't know how to train or which one to use. When I return to the woods to train more, I'll see what happens. Perhaps then, I'll find some motivation. Izuku was happy with his strategy and accelerated his pace to get home before Inko became upset that he was staying out late once more. She was concerned about him even though she knew he enjoyed sneaking out and spending the whole weekend live in the forest. Izuku felt as though his life depended on it, so he pulled his arms out and sprinted full speed. The last thing I need is Mom installing cameras to see when I leave. Don't worry, Mom, I'm coming home. He could continue this for some time with his improved physique. Just a few seconds later, Izuku was making his way to his apartment by climbing the stairs. However, Izuku was able to hear frantic footsteps coming from his apartment by using his enhanced hearing. Izuku sighed at the sound, knowing what was behind the door. Izuku approached the door, braced himself, and pushed it open. The door swung open with full force as soon as it cracked, and Inko seized Izuku and gave him a bear hug. "Izuku, my baby, where have you been? Do you know what time it is? I was so worried." Izuku made every effort to avoid Inko, but he was afraid that his powerful new abilities would harm her. Izuku finally succeeded in pushing Inko away, but she clung to his arm like a spider and wouldn't let go. "Yes, I know what time it is, Mom. I was just with Koga and Razone. I'm fine, so can you please let go of me?" Izuku said. "No, I won't let go of my son. You keep staying out late, and when I'm not looking, you disappear into the woods for an entire weekend. Plus, today you skipped school. So I was worried about you. I can't let you out of my sight." As she held Izuku closer, Inko appeared dejected. Izuku could sense her distress, so he put on a soft face and tone. "Mom, you do realize you've called the police so many times that they refuse to initiate a manhunt for me now, right? Plus, I still come home, so there's nothing you need to worry about." With teary eyes, Inko looked up at Izuku and noticed his gentle smile as he said, "Mom, look at me. Mom, I would never do anything that I knew would cause you great pain, but I have to do all this for the sake of my goals. I can't stop, but at the same time, I don't want to worry you. So please, have faith in me. When Inko looked into Izuku's eyes, she saw sincere concern and kindness. That was the Izuku she knew, and she smiled. Although she couldn't just let Izuku go, Inko wanted to let him go and become who he wanted to be. I know, Izuku, but I don't want you to disappear. I can't handle that again. Izuku gave Izuku's arm a firm embrace. She was extremely afraid that Izuku would not come home. When Izuku was abducted as a young child, Inko felt like a total failure as a person. If Izuku didn't arrive at the house one day, she wasn't sure what she would do to herself. Taking her hands gently, Izuku held them while carefully removing them from his arm. Mom, I'm a lot tougher than I used to be. And now I have the strength to pursue my goals. But at the same time, I promise I won't leave you like that. After all, you're the only person who makes Katsudon the way I like it. Izuku gave Inko a gentle smile, and she was relieved to hear that Izuku would always be back. Inko pulled herself together, inhaled deeply, stepped back from Izuku, and realized how much he had changed. Even though Izuku was a first-year middle schooler, he was intimidating. His slitted orange and green eyes were menacing, his white hair with green roots gleamed like his confidence, and his clothes accentuated his muscles. However, Inko felt bad about Izuku's skin scarring like that when she saw the 9 brand on her neck. Inko was pleased with Izuku's progress. Even though Izuku was often icy and stoic, Inko could see that he was still sincere. As Inko gazed at her son, a tiny, proud smile appeared on her face. Izuku watched as his mother went to the kitchen to begin preparing dinner, saying, "Okay, Izuku, I expect you to keep that promise. Now let's make dinner." As he considered how Inko had come to accept his character, a tiny smile formed on his lips. Izuku said, "I knew today was a great day." After removing his shoes and jacket, he went to the kitchen to watch Inko cooking a rather substantial meal. However, Izuku had to eat the big meal because his mutations demanded it. Inko and Izuku prepared dinner in silence. They supported one another and didn't want to disturb the tranquil environment they had established. Izuku helped bring food over and set the table after it was ready. Now that everything was set up, Izuku and Inko started eating. Izuku felt hungry and ran through his food as fast as he could. As Izuku consumed 2.5 meals in front of her, Inko simply grinned at him. The remainder of the evening was calm and quiet, with the mother and son occasionally speaking to one another. However, everyone soon went to prepare for bed. Izuku needed to pack a bag with supplies before he could lay down in bed. The time of day was very early. Nobody should be motivated to get out of bed before the sun even peeks over the horizon. You must not be fully human if you wake up this early. One individual, however, consistently woke up this early. It was someone who was not entirely human, of course. Izuku got out of bed and stretched his legs and arms. Izuku put on a dark green jean jacket, black jeans, and a gray long-sleeve shirt with ease thanks to his exceptional night vision. Izuku, now completely dressed, picked up his supply bag and got ready to leave the apartment covertly in order to head to the mountains. Izuku left his room without a word, carefully shutting the door behind him. As he froze in the hallway, Izuku listened intently to the quiet. Izuku could hear other electronics humming and his mother dozing off in her room. Izuku walked cautiously to the front door while Inko was sound asleep. However, upon arriving, he noticed a message on the door. Grabbing the note, Izuku read it with his night vision. "Izuku, I'm aware that you're attempting to slip out once more if you're reading this. I won't stop you, but please make it home safely." As Izuku read Inko's note, a tiny smile appeared on his face. Izuku unlocked the door and departed the apartment after folding the note and putting it in his pocket. Izuku stepped out of his apartment building and started to walk toward the nearest late-night train station, taking in the clean, fresh morning air. As Izuku got off the train, he glanced around and noticed the route he always took to reach the mountains. Izuku thought he should walk to the countryside after spending the last few hours on the train. Izuku noticed that the sun was beginning to rise as his feet moved him. In order to reach the mountains and camp before the sun rose completely, he accelerated his pace. Izuku continued to walk until he came to a dirt road that took him farther into the woods. Before long, Izuku was surrounded only by trails, and the only solid ground for feet to touch was paved dirt. Izuku eventually discovered a path that was blocked off and marked, "No entries due to potential hazards." Izuku was perplexed by the sign because this path had not previously been blocked. Furthermore, he frequently used that route to reach his campsite, and Izuku was positive that there was no danger there. The forest rangers would quickly take care of any fallen trees. Izuku leapt over the barrier and started to walk through the blocked path to his campsite, knowing that there was no danger ahead. Izuku felt the rocks beneath him change as he walked, gazing at all the trees that surrounded him. Izuku felt relaxed because he was not stressed by anything here, and the forest was a wonderful place to unwind. Plus, there's no excess noise from the city, so I can rest my ears and hear things clearly. And there's no smell of asphalt or anything else. All I smell and hear is nature. I love coming up here. Izuku found his campsite after continuing to walk and then turning onto a secret trail that no one uses. There was a lean tent constructed out of tree branches and a log next to a fire pit in the tiny, desolate, and inhabited campsite. Just like how I left it. When Izuku finally arrived at his second home, he took out his knife and hurled it at the tree that held his slender tent. I still got it. Izuku smiled and hung his jean jacket on the handle after the knife became deeply embedded in the tree. Izuku then took out the blanket he always carried with him from his supply bag and placed it in the slender tent. Since he didn't want his phone to go off and frighten all the nearby animals, he threw it on the bed. Since some animals would be out foraging right now, Izuku, who had set up his campsite as simply as possible, decided to go hunting for some food. Additionally, he could build a fire with more sticks and grass to cook the meat he would receive. Izuku removed his green jean jacket from the knife and tossed it onto his blanket after formulating his strategy. With remarkable strength, he yanked the knife from the tree. Izuku put it away and started to walk to his regular hunting spot. As some time went by, Izuku gathered sticks for a fire as fuel. He had not yet discovered any food, but he was not concerned because he could hear and smell the nearby animals. Izuku gathered enough sticks and went back to camp to put them all down. Izuku picked up his knife, decided to take hunting seriously now, and turned to leave. He wanted to see if he could catch something in a more isolated, downwind location. However, Izuku encountered a fork in the road while following the path, giving him the option of taking the more worn path or the entirely unexplored one. Izuku took the untrod path, thinking he would catch more, and felt the unevenness of the ground up here. In addition, there were numerous soft spots that caused footprints everywhere. Izuku learned from the terrain that this route was rarely used. Izuku continued to walk until he noticed something strange. Ripped clothes, but only a section of a shirt. Izuku looked at the article of clothing and noticed a few strange things, but nothing particularly unusual. The shirt was ripped from the outside, but there's no indication that the fabric was moving when it was ripped. Maybe a typhoon ripped some clothes someone set out to dry, and the wind dragged it up here into the remote mountains. Izuku was about to dismiss it as a strange incident when he noticed something in the soft dirt nearby. Izuku approached it and saw that it was some sort of footprint. Since it's still here and the wind or rain hasn't washed it away, this was made recently, at least within the last few days. However, the more Izuku examined the footprint, the stranger it seemed. Although the footprint resembled that of a human, it was not deeply imprinted and the feet were excessively long. In addition, it appeared to have only one sharp talon and no toes at all. Additionally, this person was obviously bipedal based on the distance between strides. There's a discrepancy between the foot size and supposed height. With feet this big, this person should have been heavier and made a larger imprint. And even if the footprint is weird, maybe someone with a mutation quirk came through here recently. Izuku's eyes widened in shock as the wind blew past his desire to keep analyzing. Izuku stood up quickly, sniffed the air, and detected the smell of blood. As soon as Izuku realized the odor was coming from upwind, he immediately ran to investigate. To the stench of blood, Izuku hurried past trees, pushing branches aside as he went straight ahead. Izuku sniffed the air constantly, careful not to lose the trail he was following. Izuku eventually emerged from the tree line into a clearing and searched for the source of the odor. Then he spotted a tent and hurried to see who needed assistance. Izuku was taken aback by the condition of the campsite when he first arrived. Izuku felt shivers down his spine as he took in the lethal scene. The inside of the tent was stained with blood after it was torn open. As Izuku cautiously entered the campsite, he noticed more bloodstains. The fact that there were no bodies and that all of the blood trails pointed in the same direction, toward the clearing, was the most alarming aspect of this murder, though. Izuku knelt down and concentrated while examining the mass murder scene. Based on the tent size and blood trails, 3 people were killed and taken once they died, and the blood is pretty dry, so this murder was about 2 or 3 days ago. A sharp object was used based on how clean the cuts were to the tent. But with the amount of blood spilled, it was sloppy, almost beastly. There are no animals out here big enough with sharp claws to kill 3 people. Plus, no animal would attack 3 people by itself. At the scene, Izuku was left scratching his head. The fact that all of the blood was contained within the tent and that no police were already present was the most alarming aspect of this murder, though. Izuku stared. He thought about calling the police, but then he looked over and saw something else that made him shudder. Maybe these people are the ones who put up the no entry sign. They wanted privacy, and with the sign still up, no one would have come up here to find this murder. Damn, and it looks like they were ambushed, most likely in the dead of night, but with this area being so secluded in the path blocking sign, the only people up here would be them. What the hell would you do this? Izuku thought. Another long humanoid footprint with a single talon and no toes was found directly next to the campsite. Izuku approached it, looked at the footprint, and realized that it led to the clearing as well. Izuku gulped, knowing he needed to make sure. He approached the blood trails in search of footprints. Izuku discovered the obvious evidence that the bodies had been dragged away. The blood trail was crossed by the same recognizable humanoid footprints. Their footprints straddle the blood trails, and they are pointed in the opposite direction of the clearing. Whatever is leaving those footprints killed these people and dragged their bodies away. Izuku felt his anxiety rising and reached for his phone to call for assistance, but he had nothing in his pockets. Izuku realized he had left his phone at his campsite as he moved his hands around his body. Shit, I should go back for it. Izuku made the decision that it would be foolish to stay here any longer because night would soon be falling and got ready to depart. However, Izuku halted when a frightening idea crossed his mind. I took quite some time to examine the scene. I left my scent everywhere I went. This thing has a nice nose if it's an animal. Additionally, I believe that I am the only person on this mountain. I'll be leading it straight to me if I leave now, and I'll be making myself a simple target if I don't deal with it right away. Furthermore, this is only one of its dens, and I have no idea where it might be or what its habits are. Izuku gathered his thoughts, made a choice, and hoped it was the right one. Whatever did this lurks on the mountain, and since I'm up here, it will smell me and come after me next. If I don't kill this beast now, it will kill me. I'll be at a severe disadvantage since it will be on its territory. But since it may only come out at night, I can possibly surprise it and kill it if it's down there. This is my best course of action. Izuku drew his knife, steeled himself, and entered the clearing. He discovered additional footprints, all of which pointed to the same location in the clearing. It was good that there was so much activity because it meant that whatever was on this mountain was most likely residing in this den at the moment. There was a little hole in the middle of the clearing that led down farther. Izuku peered down into the hole and saw that it was a surface entrance to an underground cave. Izuku decided that he would have some visibility thanks to his night vision, so he started to descend into the pitch-black underground cave. Despite the tight fit, Izuku was able to enter and descend into the cave. With a few loose rocks falling after him, Izuku's feet struck the floor and he dropped in lightly while still making noise. However, as soon as Izuku entered the cave, he smelled rotten flesh and flinched away from the foul stench. Izuku was about to throw up, but he took a few deep breaths to get used to the foul stench. Yep. This thing is living here right now. No way it would leave food unattended. Izuku took a minute to get his eyes and nose used to the dank, dark cave environment before he noticed that there was another path that led farther inside. If this thing only comes out at night, then it will be in the deepest part of the cave to hide from any light. Izuku drew his knife and held it before him as he approached the new path's entrance slowly. Izuku noticed something unexpected as he approached. The skeleton, clad in armor and other equipment, was right at the path's entrance. Izuku knelt down and searched through the skeleton's gear bag, discovering documents written in a language he didn't understand, strange trinkets, expired liquids in vials, and gold currency he didn't recognize. The armor looks too big for me, and it looks like age has caught up with it. Izuku gazed bewilderedly at the contents of the bag. The armor and equipment appeared to be pre-medieval European in design, and none of the items had any Japanese history. Where the hell did you come from? And how long have you been here? Izuku merely shook his head in perplexity after taking another look at the skeleton. Then he reached for the 2 sheaths he saw on the skeleton's back. There was a blade in one sheath. As Izuku pulled the blade out, it broke and rusted through. Izuku was about to depart when he noticed the skeleton's rotten bony hand. Rusted blade, which means you've been here for a long time if a steel blade rusted in a sheath. After examining the hand, Izuku noticed a long, shiny sword that was free of rust. After examining the sword and its sheath, Izuku turned back to the skeleton and said, "This is absurd. If a skeleton with completely decomposed flesh is here, it indicates that you have been here for a long time, and given the conditions of this cave, your sword should have rusted as you decomposed like the other one. However, there is no rust on this sword. Therefore, it must be a different metal rather than steel. Is it silver? This is a strange sword, if it is. The shiny finish and absence of rust would be explained by silver. I think I'll accept this sword because I like it. You won't need your gold, so I'll take it all for myself." "It's a bit too big for me, but I'll grow into it," Izuku said, grabbing the other sheath from the skeleton's back and placing it on his own. He then tied the straps over his chest to secure the sheath in place and moved it around to make sure it didn't obstruct his movements. Izuku was pleased with the sheath, so he took the strange sword and gazed at it. The handle was dark glossy, worn wood, with a metal ring in the center to help determine the proper hand positions for two hands. The pommel was heavy, but it didn't affect Izuku's grip. And the crossguard was an intriguing detail. It wasn't straight, but rather V-shaped, and extended up the sword. This special crossguard will make it simple to catch other weapons, and the V-shape won't obstruct my hands. Despite how little was ground off in the fuller, the sword still has a good balance. Furthermore, considering its feathery weight, the blade is surprisingly stiff. Even though I might not be aware of it, that might be my enhanced strength. After taking a few swings and enjoying the way the sword felt in his hands, Izuku said, "It's a lot harder to use than I thought. It's nothing like my knife." The sword cut through the air with ease, and Izuku almost stumbled while attempting to swing it. Izuku chose his knife over the sword and put it in its sheath on his back. Refocusing his attention, he took a deep breath and pulled out his knife. Using his night vision, Izuku explored the cave path and saw nothing. Feeling safe, he made sure to keep his wits about him because this was a creature's home territory. Plus, whatever this thing is, it likes to ambush people, probably because it knows it can win in direct combat, so it will try to sneak up on me. I need to keep my senses sharp and my mind sharper. This thing has intelligence. Izuku moved cautiously through the darkness, seeing nothing with his natural night vision, but he knew he was getting closer to the cave's den because of the worsening stench. Izuku came to a bend in the cave path and approached it without making any noise, leaning against the corner and peeping out, bewildered to see a huge cloud of fog sitting at the bottom of the cave path and inside a cave chamber. Izuku was perplexed by what he saw. How the hell did a cloud of fog spawn down here? This looks like the deepest part of the cave, but why would fog show up here? Then he noticed something unsettling. A faint light moving within the fog, leading Izuku to believe that someone was still alive. Izuku lost his sense of reason and hurried past the corner and into the fog inside the cave chamber, screaming out, "Hey, who's still here? If someone is still alive, I have to get them out of here." Izuku hurried through the dense, black fog, unable to see anything in front of him, and he ran to where he thought the light was coming from, ready to defend whoever it was. However, as he approached, the faint smell of blood entered his nostrils, stopping him in his tracks. Izuku stopped his rush and looked down to see the floor, but it was covered in blood. He tried to see through the fog, but it briefly cleared, and his eyes widened in horror as he saw the torso of a partially eaten man, followed by a woman's head, and then another man's severed arms. All of these body parts were piled up as if they were being stored for later use, and if Izuku counted correctly, they made up 3 people. Vomit started to rise up Izuku's throat. His heart rate was soaring, and he was trying to regain his composure when he realized that he was losing it. A realization struck him, and he felt fear rise at his foolish error. They're all dead, which means its trap caught me. When Izuku heard a loud fleshy slam behind him, he instinctively rolled forward, thinking an attack was imminent, but as he did so, he felt something slit open his back, and a sharp pain shot through him as he rolled forward and slammed into the heap of bloody limbs. Cursing his inexperience and foolishness, Izuku stood back up, his knife ready, and felt his heartbeat quicken and his blood flow through his veins as he put his hand behind him and felt a little blood start to run down his back and stain his clothes, preparing his knife for the next ambush. It came after me from behind, so it does like surprise attacks. Izuku thought of a new strategy and started to carefully backpedal while concentrating on his senses to see if he could pick up on any hints as to where this thing was. However, the fog grew even thicker, making it impossible to see anything. His night vision could only help so much. Izuku was cautiously walking backward when he noticed movement ahead and stopped. Izuku tried to sense it through the fog by focusing on his senses, but suddenly something burst through the fog and a tiny light shimmer appeared. Izuku was prepared for it, though, and despite the fog blocking his vision, he was able to make out the outline of the beast from the little light it somehow emitted. The beast charged at him, and Izuku drew his knife back, then thrust it out with his other hand, attempting to reach around it and bring it closer for a more vicious stab. Izuku was confused when the creature abruptly turned into fog and flew past him when he thrust his hands out, but he would soon discover why when he sensed a bloodthirsty presence to his left and noticed a slight change in light. Izuku immediately dove to the side, avoiding a devastating slash aimed at his neck, but the claw that pierced the fog cut into his arm as he attempted to dive, a reaction fueled by adrenaline and pure primal instinct. Damn, so this thing can control the fog and make illusions with it. It's smarter and more dangerous than I thought. I need to seal my field of vision to narrow down its preferred directions of attack. Izuku grunted in pain as he looked at his left arm, where blood was leaking out of two surprisingly deep-cut wounds that were difficult to see due to the darkness and fog. Izuku thought quickly and ran through the fog until he slammed into a wall. To regain his composure, he pushed his back onto the cave wall and held out his knife, waiting for the next attack. Izuku calmed down and focused all of his energy on his senses, trying to track the creature through the fog, but his range was limited because the fog muffled sound and smell. When Izuku saw two glowing outlines speeding toward him, he instantly prepared for the attack, knowing that one of the outlines was an illusion. But which one? Damn it! Izuku thought, I can't prolong this, or it will take me down. I need to find its weakness before it finds mine. Focused, Izuku heard the smallest sound and sprang to his right, and as he had expected, the outline he dove toward vanished and became fog. Rising again, Izuku lunged for the other glowing outline, which was momentarily taken aback by his audacity. Izuku immediately struck something hard and threw it to the ground, writhing on the ground while battling the creature that attempted to throw him off it. As he struggled to regain control, the creature threw its arm out and slashed at Izuku's chest. Blood immediately poured from his slashed chest, but Izuku pulled his knife back and plunged it into the beast's presumed chest, but his entire hand entered the glowing open chest cavity, preventing the knife from hitting anything. Another swing came, and Izuku caught it with his other hand as he pulled his arm back for another knife plunge. The creature frantically attempted to pull its arm back, but Izuku prevented it from moving its arms and legs. Izuku felt the creature wind up for another sash with its free arm as he tried to regain control and balance. Seeing the attack coming from the light this creature emitted from its chest, Izuku knocked the arm away as it swung at him. Izuku, tired of its attacks, stabbed the creature in the arm. Izuku tried to stay on top, but he was flung off and slammed into the wall with a fierce scream of pain that reverberated throughout the cave as the creature thrashed around even more violently. Gathering his courage, Izuku got to his feet right away and saw clearly what he was fighting. The fog and darkness made it difficult to see, but because of the light this creature was emitting because of its close proximity, Izuku was able to see everything without hindrance. Its limbs were slender and disproportionate, with claws stretching out at the ends of the feet and hands with only 4 bony fingers, each with its own claw. Izuku's jaw dropped at the sight of the creature, which was literally just skin and bone given how little meat was on it. The skin was leathery and had a deep, slimy green color, but it stopped covering the chest area because there was no chest cavity. Instead, it was hollowed out, concealing the source of its light behind its exposed rib bones. The beast's ugly face, however, was its most repulsive feature. The skin appeared almost too tight around the head, pulling it back and causing the creature to hunch its back in response. The eyes were wide, reflective, and unsettling as Izuku stared into them. The jaws were misaligned, forcing the gums to be exposed to air all the time and causing the creature to snarl with every breath. And the pointed ears stood tall at the sides of the head, and the only indication that a nose was present was the absence of one covering a hole in the face. The creature howled at Izuku, startling him as he watched it vanish into the dark fog, somehow concealing the light its torso emitted, and motion returned to the world as time seemed to slow down as he stared at this terrible natural freak in front of him. What the hell is that thing? No, now is not the time for this. My knife is still in its arm. All I have left is this sword. Izuku saw what he was up against and felt sick and uneasy, as if he were facing a real monster. The sword felt good in his hands, and Izuku gripped it tightly, hoping that his strength and senses would help him aim his swings. Taking his chances, Izuku grabbed the handle on his back and pulled it out. By concentrating on his senses, Izuku sniffed the air and smelled something horrible that made him want to throw up. He looked over at the source of the smell and saw that it was the creature's blood because he could see some clear splatter shapes through the fog and darkness. He then sniffed the air and smelled the blood moving through the fog. Izuku was struck with inspiration as he came up with a plan and discovered a weakness in the creature. It can somehow create fog illusions and conceal its presence, which is why I can't hear, see, or smell it very well. However, it didn't conceal its bloody scent, most likely because it is unaware that it has one, and I can use it to predict when it will attack. As if on cue, Izuku saw the fog shift, as multiple fog apparitions were coming at him at once. Izuku pulled his sword up and saw one come at him as it swung at him. Izuku had assumed a ready stance and was ready to attack, but the beast was surprisingly agile and hid its presence, so this turned into a waiting game. Chaining his footwork together, Izuku ducked to the left and swerved through the apparitions that attacked him, weaving through them all until he reached the area where the monster blood smell was strongest. Two apparitions formed directly in front of Izuku, and he swung his sword to clear them and gain momentum. Izuku allowed the sword to swing freely, spinning in a circle, destroying the two fog apparitions, and swinging at what seemed to be a random fog cloud, but as soon as he did, he struck something tangible and felt his sword slicing through flesh, and the second his sword was cut, a guttural howl of agony erupted. The sound of the howl stunned Izuku, rocking his mind and causing his ears to bleed, leaving him vulnerable to attack. Izuku was hit so hard in the gut that he was thrown through the dark fog before he could regain consciousness. He landed with a thud and skidded across the floor until he stopped. His adrenaline was pumping, so he got up right away and gripped his sword even more tightly as his mind was only focused on the battle. Izuku sniffed the air and smelled more blood from the monster. Not letting this opportunity pass him by, Izuku locked onto the scent and, disregarding his condition, rushed in again, holding his sword high, until he reached the monster, who appeared surprised to see him already there, but Izuku didn't care what else happened because his adrenaline was running high and his mind was focused on the fight. When the monster attempted to retreat, a quick swing struck it in the shoulder, but Izuku didn't give it a chance. Instead, he lunged in and stabbed it through the exposed ribs, causing it to screech in agony and claw at Izuku, who was now in close proximity. As the monster ripped at his flesh, attempting to kill him, Izuku sustained several deep cuts on his arms and chest. In excruciating pain, he pushed even harder and screamed aloud, "RRRAAAGGGGHHHH." Izuku sustained even more severe wounds as the beast frantically mauled his skin as his sword sank deeper into the creature, making it claw at his chest even more quickly. Nevertheless, Izuku's muscles held firm as he screamed and pushed the monster to the ground, landing on top of it again. YYYYAAGGGGHHHH. When the beast struck the ground, it was momentarily stunned. Izuku felt his blood splatter across the floor from his arms and chest, and he punched the creature as hard as he could, further stunned it. Seeing his opportunity, Izuku grabbed his sword and yanked it violently from the monster, causing it to scream as blood spurted from the stab wound. In a final attempt, the monster stabbed Izuku in the stomach, causing Izuku to gasp in agony as the claws attempted to tear him apart. But Izuku persisted, grabbing the monster's arm and pulling it out of his gut, causing him to bleed even more. When the monster attempted to pull its arm away, Izuku didn't let go, and he immediately raised his sword with one hand to decapitate it. The beast, sensing its death, scratched at Izuku's right eye, and the claw sliced through his face, causing him to grunt in excruciating pain. However, as soon as he felt his right eye was still functioning, he swung his sword as hard as he could with one hand. Izuku screamed and threw all of his strength from one arm into the slash, feeling the sword cut even further through the bony neck of the beast, and the blade swung true as it sliced into it. RRRAAGGGGHHHH. Izuku felt the sword cut through almost immediately as the blade lost all resistance and emerged from the other side. Blood splattered across the floor, and the monster's body went limp instantly. The light from the monster's chest started to fade because it was no longer filled with life force, and soon the cave's darkness engulfed Izuku, forcing him to rely solely on his night vision. Huffs escaped Izuku's mouth as he looked down and saw the monster's head roll to the side and smear its blood across the floor. Izuku took several deep breaths to cope with the pain and exhaustion he had caused himself. He could see the fog beginning to clear as his mind began to be free of instincts and adrenaline. Izuku's face lit up a little with satisfaction. I hunted and killed a real-life monster. Izuku was happy to have this opportunity, but it was his only one. His pride overcame his thoughts. His healing factor was good, but not that good, and Izuku was on the verge of passing out when he heard footsteps coming from the entrance to this cave chamber. Izuku was delirious from the blood loss, so he fell off the monster's corpse and lay on his back, staring at the dark cave ceiling, waiting to bleed out. Izuku turned his head, using what strength he had left before fainting, and saw a woman in a black trench coat, black boots, black leather gloves, and a black sun hat, but she was so pale that she glowed in the darkness. "You don't look good, my dear." Izuku just stared at her, not even getting a good look at her face before closing his eyes and waiting for death, but his ears were still functional. "You took out a monster all on your own with no preparation, even though I am impressed. I'll assist you because you completed my task for me. I'll feel terrible if you die, so please don't." Before he passed out, Izuku heard her grab his sword and mutter something as he felt himself being lifted up and carried away. "Wait a minute. Are you a witch?" A window was open, letting in a soft, warm light that filled the room. A variety of books, plants, soil, and furniture, including tables and chairs, were scattered throughout the space. However, there was a bed with a person sleeping beneath the covers directly beneath the window. Their white hair was illuminated by the light streaming in through the window, giving the impression that it was glowing. After a while, the sun descended and illuminated closed eyes. As the discomfort in the closed eyes increased, they started to twitch. The eyes fluttered open, slowly opening to reveal wide, open slits that instantly narrowed when exposed to the light. They quickly closed their eyes once more to adapt to the light, and then they opened completely, revealing narrowed slits on both the amber orange and green eyes. As his eyes grew accustomed to the sunlight, Izuku let out a groan. Izuku blinked to wake up his amber and green eyes after they had acclimatized. Izuku was confused and thought he was in a flower shop when he woke up and sniffed the air and noticed a lot of floral scents. Izuku felt the bedclothes fall from his body as he leaned up, which further perplexed him. However, Izuku gasped as he fell back into the bed after he leaned up and felt a sharp pain in his stomach. Izuku moaned as the pain persisted. After a while, it subsided, and he searched his mind for a way to recall how he got here and how he became so injured. Curious, Izuku pulled back the bedclothes to reveal his stomach and chest covered in layers of gauze and bandages. Izuku also saw how many bandages he had on his arms. Izuku began to get interested in this bizarre situation. He didn't know what had happened to him or how he got here. Thinking, Izuku rummaged through his memories. As he concentrated on his thoughts, Izuku recalled rising early in his apartment, leaving the house, boarding the train, and traveling to the mountain where he typically trained. Izuku continued to focus while closing his eyes, recalling the horrific murder scene. He then proceeded to the cave and discovered a skeleton. Suddenly, Izuku was struck with strong memories of the monster. Izuku remembered fighting that monster, clutching his head and running his bandaged hand through his white hair. Izuku's face hurt as he winced as all the memories of the fight's blood and pain came flooding back. Izuku gasped reflexively as his face started to sting. He was perplexed, but then he recalled that he had been scratched on the right side of his face. Izuku felt stitches on his face as he raised his hand to his right eye, wondering if this wound would heal. However, the question remains unanswered. Where the hell am I? Izuku turned his head to listen to the sound of a door opening, but it came from somewhere else in the building. Izuku struggled against the pain and was able to sit up on the bed. Izuku put his feet on the floor, swung his legs across to stand, and got ready to rise. Izuku heard a doorknob turn abruptly, and when he looked up, he saw that the door to this room was open. Izuku saw a tall, slim woman with pale, clear skin and long, straight black hair enter the room with soil and flower pots. Izuku was sitting on the bed when the woman entered, and she froze. Both Izuku and the woman looked at each other with interest. The woman moved to a table and put the soil and pots down, breaking the stare. Izuku was still staring at her when she turned to face him. The woman sighed, picked up a long object that was beside the table, and threw it to Izuku. When Izuku caught it, he saw that it was the sheath and sword he had taken from the cave. And his knife in its sheath was fastened to the sheath. In addition to saving him, this woman knew where the monster was, which made Izuku wonder who she was. Izuku glanced back up to see the woman take a glass of alcohol and settle into the chair beside the table. The woman poured herself a glass, then poured another and extended her hand to offer it to Izuku, causing the chair to squeak as she sat down. Izuku gazed silently at the glass before turning to face the woman, who rolled her eyes and extended her hand to offer it. "It's not going to kill you," she said, her voice tired and curious. Reluctantly, Izuku accepted the glass and took a tiny sip before saying, "My name is Izuku Midoriya." The woman simply nodded as Izuku took another sip. As the alcohol hit him, it stung, but not too much. Izuku glanced back up at the woman, who had a pitying and sympathetic expression on her face. The woman poured herself another glass and shook her head, asking, What's with that look?" She finished her glass, and Izuku was inspired to follow suit. "I thought all witchers were extinct, and then one shows up in this day and age." After taking a look at his glass, Izuku finished drinking it and put it down. Izuku's expression turned serious as he turned back to face her, and she noticed his shift in attitude. Izuku stared at her after he hesitated a little. "Witcher," she said. "I will always remember that word, which the doctor used when he mutated us. But she must know something about it because she is aware of it." Izuku overcame his reluctance to speak. The woman stopped pouring herself more alcohol and looked at Izuku with shocked and curious eyes, asking, "What is a witcher?" She stared at Izuku with even more sympathy, saying, "It's what you are. Don't tell me. You have no idea what you are." Izuku inhaled deeply before meeting her gaze. As she finished pouring her drink, the woman looked at Izuku and said, "I have no idea what I am, but you do, so tell me, what am I?" She then took the glass and gulped it down. With a sigh, she wiped the corners of her mouth. After giving it some thought, Izuku decided it was acceptable to tell her, "First, tell me what happened to you. How did you end up like this? Who did this to you?" She did, after all, save him and was somehow aware of the mutations he had experienced. She didn't try to hold him as a captive or chain him up despite being aware of everything. Izuku showed the woman the number 9 brand on his neck, and she became even paler. "I was diagnosed as quirkless when I was 4 years old, and I think that's why I was abducted at the age of 5 on this doctor's orders. 20 children were gathered for an experiment, and I was branded as number 9. The woman gazed at Izuku with astonished eyes, expressing her disbelief that someone would subject young children to such treatment. "I went through 2 years of hellish training, alongside several other kids my age who were also quirkless." But Izuku went on, recalling the agonizing events. "After the training was done, only 12 out of 20 kids survived. All the remaining kids were taken to a chamber, where we were then pumped full of chemicals that literally tore our bodies apart from the inside out. I don't remember how long it happened, but the pain was indescribable, and only myself and 3 others made it out alive. After the process was done, our mutations were complete, and out of the 4 of us, I was the only one not disabled." The woman's face darkened, and she clenched her hands in disappointment and rage. The woman looked at Izuku's stoic face and said, "Only 4 kids survived that torment, and you're the only one not disabled. Who would do such a thing to children?" The woman nodded in satisfaction, relieved that the man who had done this was no longer alive. "The doctor did this. I never got his name, but it doesn't matter anymore since he's no longer walking among us. Good, no one will ever have to suffer like that again. For what it's worth, I'm sorry something like that happened to you. You never should have been forced to go through such a thing." Izuku observed the woman's face as she considered her response. "It's not worth much, but thank you. Now, tell me what you know. You're clearly familiar with what happened to me." "Okay. But first my name. My name in this era is Komi Ketsuki." Izuku interrupted her after giving her a strange look. Izuku was simply perplexed, so Komi became irritated but ignored it. "This era? What does that mean?" "You'll learn after I tell you some things that will make this all clearer to you. Let's start with what you are. You are a witcher, a person made to hunt and kill monsters, someone who has had mutations that change your very body applied to you. All your senses are enhanced beyond regular human abilities. Your strength and speed are also greater than normal, and those attributes can climb even higher. Your stamina is also off the charts, along with your metabolism." Izuku sighed at the fact that Komi was that he already knew. Komi shook her head, saying, "I already know all that, but since you know about it, then what's your point?" Izuku tilted his head in an attempt to comprehend her statement. "My point is, I know what you are and how you're made. I know all about you and your abilities. I've had plenty of time to study and learn about all your abilities and how you're made. That's why I'm perplexed by your existence." Komi looked at Izuku to see how he would respond to what she was going to say. "So if you know all about my abilities, then why are you confused?" she asked. Izuku heard her say, "Magic is real." He was about to laugh, but Komi's dead seriousness stopped him. Rather, Izuku made an effort to comprehend that assertion. Izuku attempted to refute the existence of magic, knowing it couldn't exist, but Komi was adamant about her belief. "Wait, magic is real? How do you know? In this world of quirks, you don't need magic to do anything." Izuku shook his head, unsure of how to react to Komi's defense of magic, but he rolled with it to learn more. "Listen, magic is real, although it's not technically magic that you've come to understand. Its true form is chaos, an amalgamation of all kinds of invisible energies and forces that exist everywhere. But beings like myself can channel it to do things, and then when people see it, they call it magic." Komi looked at Izuku's face once more and asked, "Okay, let's say magic exists. Why does that matter when we're talking about me?" Izuku looked at Komi and became perplexed when she said, It matters because every witcher I've ever met, aside from you, was made with magic. You were made with a completely different method, one that didn't require the use of magic. And making a witcher without magic is unheard of. Komi, you're making no sense. You say you've met other witchers besides me, and that you thought witchers were extinct. So where are all of them? Izuku remained silent as he tried to process all the information Komi was providing him. They're all dead. So as far as I'm concerned, you're the last witcher left alive. Izuku didn't know how to put it all together, and it didn't make sense to him. Komi realized she was just confusing Izuku and sighed as she tried to come up with a way to explain what he was. So I'm a witcher, but I wasn't made with magic. I was made with different methods. And you know this because you've met other witchers before. If that's true, then where are all of them? But this doesn't answer anything. Then she recalled the monster he had slain in the cave. I suppose I can begin by explaining who he is in that manner. Izuku looked at Komi, finding her genuine interest in his response to her question. Let's rewind a bit. Back in the cave, do you know what you killed? She asked. Komi nodded contentedly, got to his feet, and walked over to carry Izuku. I don't know what I killed. I do know that it wasn't natural at all. But that's about it. Izuku stopped her with his outstretched hand before starting to move. He ached when he stood up, and Komi became worried and came to assist him. Izuku smiled at her worry and reassured her, saying, Don't strain yourself. Despite having a good healing factor, you still take damage. Besides, I'm not even sure you should be standing with the amount of damage you took. Komi was surprised to see Izuku stand up without much assistance, and she said, Relax, I'm doing much better since my healing factor is decent. Izuku was already feeling well enough to get out of bed, but she was positive he would require more time to rest. Komi watched Izuku and motioned for him to come along. Following Komi around the building, Izuku saw that he was in a flower shop with a wide variety of flowers on display. Izuku followed Komi into a living room, still following her. Izuku was shocked to see how easily Komi lifted the enormous leather couch in her living room and revealed a door on the floor. Komi motioned for Izuku to descend the recently exposed hidden passageway beneath her couch. Izuku stepped a little and saw stairs that led to a deeper level. Komi followed Izuku down the stairs, putting the couch back down to conceal the entrance. As he reached the bottom, Izuku noticed what he thought was a herbalist's lab, lit by a number of tall candles that seemed to never go out. A bookshelf was filled with vials containing substances Izuku had never seen before, and there were plants growing in pots that he didn't recognize. Additionally, there were books on one wall that appeared to be ancient and in danger of falling apart. Curious, Izuku followed Komi as he passed and made his way to the book wall. Izuku followed, and Komi started to explain a few things to him. Izuku gazed at Komi with curiosity as she selected a book from the wall and gave it to him. What you killed in that cave was a genuine monster. A beast that is part of a species that has killed many people. But there is something unique about the monster you killed. After grabbing the book and opening it, Izuku became perplexed because the writing was in a language he couldn't comprehend. But when Izuku saw that this writing was the same one he had seen on the documents found in the cave skeleton, his eyes widened. Izuku glanced at Komi, who was grinning, letting him know that the mystery was about to be unraveled. Listen, what I'm about to tell you may sound unreal and fictional, but I assure you, it is all real, and it's the truth that has long since been forgotten. Komi smiled and sat down in a chair next to a desk with a number of notes spread across it, saying, At this point, I just need to figure out the truth and understand my place in the world. Izuku took a seat on one of the stools beside the bookcase. Listen up, because you won't want to miss this. That monster you killed is called a Fogler. It's a terrifying monster that preys on humans and feasts on their corpses. It hides in fog and uses magic to create illusions to then attack its prey. Komi raised her hand and began to wave it around. Izuku's eyes were filled with white light after he saw a distortion of space. Izuku blinked repeatedly, thinking that Komi's actions were magical, but they might also have been quirks. Then Komi went on. You should be able to read and understand the language of the book now. Izuku glanced at the book right away and realized he could understand the words. Izuku opened the book to the index, which was titled The Bestiary. He opened the book to the Fogler page after finding it there. As Izuku turned the page, he saw a number of drawings that bore a striking resemblance to the creature he had slain in the cave. Izuku read some of the passages to find out what he killed because he was so impressed. Izuku read excitedly, but Komi interrupted him to respond to his query. Jesus, I killed something like this without even knowing any of the tactics. Damn, I got lucky. And what are Witcher signs? This book says I should use Ard to blow the fog away. What's Ard? Izuku read. Izuku became excited as he heard Komi say, "Witcher signs are magic spells that witchers use." However, his stoicism kept him from showing it. "Are you saying I can use magic?" Komi asked with a small smile that was accompanied by an expression of regret. Izuku lost some of her confidence when Komi said, "Sorry, but I don't think you can use magic. After all, you weren't made with magic." Komi then started to question how Izuku was created. Izuku reflected on his own predicament as well and recalled something the doctors had told him when he was taken to the hospital after being saved. However, when we consider the fact that whoever made you into a witcher knew about witchers, they must have known about witcher signs. So they must have found a way to give you signs without actually using magic. Now that you mention it, I do remember having doctors tell me I have an exceptionally high quirk factor now. Do you think that instead of signs I have quirks to mimic witcher spells? Komi pondered this and was somewhat in agreement. Izuku continued to hold out hope that he would have signs because it would be a great addition to his abilities. Considering you weren't made with magic, it would make sense if you were made with quirks. However, you could argue that you were given mutation quirks to mimic a witcher's body, and those increased your quirk factor, so you may not have signs. Plus, by now you should have unlocked those sign substitution quirks. Unless something is stopping you from accessing those abilities. Seeing this, Komi tried to bring up the Fogler again. Did you finish reading the Fogler entry in the bestiary? When Izuku realized that Komi knew more than she was revealing, she smiled and shook her head. I did, and I must say, the Fogler I killed doesn't sound as scary as the one in the bestiary. Do you think there is a lack of information? Komi said. What aren't you telling me? Izuku listened and became perplexed because it didn't make sense for a young Fogler to exist. The Fogler you killed was fairly young and inexperienced. It wasn't an elder Fogler. Izuku became even more perplexed when Komi shook her head once more. Does that mean more Folgers are out there somewhere? For a young Fogler to exist, there has to be more. Izuku gazed at Komi in awe, but he soon grew suspicious of her since all of her statements were perplexing. Quite the opposite actually. That was the last Fogler I've ever seen, and it probably came to this world recently and by accident. And it's the same case for every monster listed in the bestiary. I haven't seen any monsters walk the earth in about 70 years. And the last monster I saw was an ancient giant centipede. Izuku started interrogating her while slyly reaching for his silver sword. Izuku snuck his silver sword out of its sheath and was about to draw it. Wait, you said you knew many witchers, and your name in this era is Komi Ketsuki. Plus, you said the Fogler came to this world by accident. And you are over 70 years old, what are you? Izuku said. Izuku's slitted eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion as Komi looked at him, and Komi smiled back. Komi smiled even more broadly at Izuku and asked, You want to know what I am? Komi suddenly charged forward, outpacing Izuku before he could even react. Komi appeared before Izuku almost instantly, her nails sharpened and aimed at his throat. A gust of wind hit Izuku as he froze, demonstrating that Komi moved quickly enough to cause the air to lag behind her. Izuku noticed that although her fingers were still pale, they were covered in black veins when she looked down at her sharp nails. Izuku turned his attention to her face and was shocked to see that her eyes were completely black and that black veins appeared all over her pale face. Reverting to her normal form, Komi smiled at Izuku and leaned in close. Izuku could tell right away by the look in her eyes that she was telling him that trying to draw his sword would be futile. Izuku dropped his sword in frustration, and Komi slowly removed her fingernails from his neck in response. Although she spoke quietly, her words were very meaningful. Izuku's eyes widened, but then he became confused. I will say this. I am not human. I am a monster. Izuku had a clear view of her slim figure, which somehow exuded strength, as Komi took a step back. Izuku watched her with a look that suggested he was attempting to understand who she was, and she returned to her chair and sat down. Izuku's eyes lingered on Komi, but he knew she was quick enough to kill him if she so desired. Let me ask you this one thing, and then I'll tell you what I am. Does the bestiary tell you where the Fogler came from? He asked. He then read the bestiary again, but he was unable to locate any information indicating the origin of the Fogler. Izuku looked back up at Komi, who nodded knowingly. There's nothing in here that tells me where a Fogler comes from. It only talks about where they reside. Izuku froze as he heard Komi say, that's because Folgers didn't originate from this world. He was even more perplexed than before. Komi nodded and went on to explain, are you saying that monsters come from other worlds? So other worlds exist? Witchers were created in response to the appearance of monsters. In fact, humans came from another world, but you lot dominated this world and made it your own, even if your kind is ill-suited to this world since nature constantly messes with humans. The only naturally occurring monsters on Earth were the relics and cursed ones. I myself came from another world, and technically I am a monster. We all came here through a cataclysm called the Conjunction of Spheres, a massive event that destabilized the multiverse and brought monsters, foliage, and other species to this world. In fact, it wasn't a meteor that killed the dinosaurs, it was the Conjunction of Spheres, and after some time, the portals left behind by the cataclysm opened, letting all manner of things come to the now dead world starting to brim with life. Izuku froze and leaned forward on his stool as he processed this information. Izuku wondered what Komi might be because she was discussing an event that she had personally experienced. That's a lot to take in, so you were brought here during this event? That makes you several millennia old. What are you? In response, Komi grinned. Izuku froze at the mention of vampires, unsure of what to think. Technically, I am classified as a high vampire. After noticing this, Komi continued to explain. I'm not like the idiotic depictions of vampires you're thinking of, and you didn't let me finish. I'm classified as a high vampire, but really I am an elder vampire, one of the oldest and most powerful vampires to exist. Izuku had no idea, so he asked, does this mean there are more vampires out there? Komi became a little depressed at the thought. Izuku understood her loneliness and felt bad for asking, but he was interested in their disappearance. As far as I know, I'm the only vampire left on the planet. I have yet to meet any other person who comes from my world. It's been several millennia since I've seen another vampire. Komi shook her head and replied, if you haven't seen any, then were they all killed by witchers? Only the idiotic lower species of vampires were killed by witchers. The vampires with intelligence, like higher vampires and elders, waited for the portals to our world to open back up, and once those portals opened, they all went back home. Then why are you still here? Did you miss your window to leave? Izuku grinned a little because he initially thought Komi was just a vampire who stayed to gain access to humans, but it turns out that she actually likes people. No, I chose to stay willingly. I quite enjoy spending time with humanity. Even though the sun doesn't bother me, I can't do a lot of things during the day since I don't have a shadow and a reflection in any mirrored surface, silver or not, but there's plenty for me to do at night. Komi gave Izuku a startled look and asked, well, I guess you're not really a monster then, are you? Izuku smiled slightly and shook his head, asking, what's that supposed to mean? I am a vampire, someone who preys on humanity. True, you are a vampire, but to me, a monster is someone or something that kills because it wants to. Beasts and animals kill to survive, which is acceptable to some degree before they must be hunted. But monsters know killing is bad and do it anyway. You know killing is bad and try to refrain from it. I'm sure you still need some blood, but you're not mercilessly killing for it. So even though you may be a vampire, you are no monster. Komi glanced at Izuku and grinned. Izuku's statement pleased her. Izuku turned to Komi and said, you know what, Izuku? You really are a witcher. I guess it's my turn to ask what that means. Komi got up and moved towards a chest she had hidden in the underground room's corner. Komi knelt down, opened the chest, and withdrew a flat silver medallion. A long time ago, when monsters and witchers were abundant, I came across a witcher who valued life and didn't want to kill needlessly. There were times when the witcher spared the lives of monsters who didn't want to hurt people. I was one of those monsters, although we didn't fight and instead, we had a drink. He was stoic and just. He had many names, but the one I remember him by is the White Wolf. You remind me of him, Izuku. You have white hair just like him, and one of your slit eyes is the same amber orange as his. Plus, your attitude towards monster hunting is just like his. Izuku watched as the silver medallion shook as though it were being filled with something, then levitated in the air as Komi approached and held it out before using some magic to warp space once more. Komi shoved the floating medallion to Izuku as soon as the space ripples stopped. Izuku took hold of the medallion and gave it a questioning look. When Izuku looked at the medallion's silver lining, he saw that the design was a wolf with its fangs out, growling. Izuku liked the medallion so much that he took the little chain that hung from it and wrapped it around his neck. When he looked up, Komi was smiling at him. You're a full-fledged witcher now, Izuku. You successfully passed the trials and hunted a monster. So I've given you this School of the Wolf Witcher medallion and filled it with magic to detect monsters. Congratulations. You can now say with confidence that you're the last witcher. Komi raised her hands and grinned. What's wrong? You doing okay? Yeah, I'm fine. It's just that I've always wanted to be a monster hunter, and now that I am, I don't know what to do. You said it yourself. Monsters are extinct, and witchers aren't needed. Furthermore, all this knowledge and history has been lost. I don't even know what the School of the Wolf is. But all this history has been forgotten. Komi gave a gloomy expression and returned to sitting on her stool. You and I are relics of the past now. We're unneeded. But we're still here, and since you're a witcher, you might live for quite a while. I knew a witcher who lived to be 300. He probably would have gone on to live longer since he retired, but the humans at the time didn't trust witchers, so they killed him. Komi laughed a little and Izuku gave her a questioning look. Harsh way to go, but what do I do now? I'm a witcher in a time when there are no monsters to hunt. Izuku chuckled and smiled at what Komi was implying. I wouldn't say there are no monsters left to hunt. You said it yourself. A monster is someone or something that kills because it wants to. Do you really think humanity is so virtuous? You have a point, and I guess I should have seen the obvious answer. I suppose I should just continue to do things my way. Komi leaned back in her chair and remarked, that doesn't sound too bad. I've been living life for a while now. It's not so bad. Izuku shook his head and rolled his eyes. In response, Izuku said, you've been alive for several millennia. I'd expect you to have a life. Komi laughed, and the two sat silently. Then Izuku noticed a book with the title Wolf Sword on the book wall. Izuku picked up the book and started reading. He recognized it as a manual on how to wield his silver longsword. Hey Komi, do you mind if I take this book? Komi shook her head and glanced at the book. I don't mind, but since these books can no longer be made and they're the last of their kind, I expect that book back in perfect condition. All these books were given to me, and I've kept them all in pristine condition. You may be a witcher, but that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Izuku closed the book and placed it beside his sword and knife, saying, I understand. I just want to practice my sword swings and learn a bit. Then take the book and bring it back, and since it looks like you're healing just fine, you can leave, but I'd suggest resting a bit more. Although you are an oddball compared to other witchers, Izuku said, pausing his plans to get up to ask Komi. Am I really that different when compared to other witchers? Yes, you are. Usually, witchers who suffer injuries like yours require longer periods of rest, but you're already up and moving in such a short amount of time, and you seem to have enhanced senses and abilities for a witcher. It's almost like you're better than a regular witcher. After grabbing the book, Izuku put the straps of his sword and knife sheath around his waist and said, interesting. I'll do some experimenting then. Izuku thought that perhaps Komi was correct about his improved abilities when he woke up and saw that the pain had almost completely disappeared. Izuku was about to leave when he realized that he was still wearing his bandages and had no shirt on. Since he hadn't had a shirt on the entire time, a tiny bit of embarrassment crept into him and forced him to confront Komi. Komi smiled as he turned to face Izuku and asked, do you have a shirt I can borrow, and can I get your phone number? You really are a witcher, trying to flatter me and get my number. Komi gave Izuku a small laugh and said, I didn't mean it like that. I'll give you my number so we can stay in close contact. I have a shirt that should fit you sitting next to the bed you woke up in. Everything you had on you is also there. I was wondering when you'd put a shirt on. I know witchers like flirting, but you're a bit too young for me. Rolling his eyes, Izuku made his way to the stairs leading out of the underground lair. Izuku started up the stairs, and after she left the room, Komi mumbled and shook her head. I'll see you around, Komi. I think I'll come around when I have some free time. Stay in good health. Izuku was able to hear her with his senses and answered, I'm a fucking elder vampire. What the hell is capable of killing me? Komi sighed and made the decision to start working, saying, you know what I meant. Izuku simply repositioned the couch to conceal the hidden entrance. Izuku grinned contentedly as he made his way back to the bed in which he had woken up and found his belongings on the bedside table. As Izuku picked up his belongings and put the shirt on, he noticed a picture of Komi in the room. Izuku picked up the picture and saw that it was of her with an older man. Izuku guessed that this picture was taken a long time ago because Komi was an elder vampire, but he was curious about the story behind it. Izuku put the picture down and went to the front of the store, where Komi was standing by the door, waiting for him. Komi approached her and held out a piece of paper, which Izuku took and discovered to be a phone number. Komi then started discussing sending Izuku on his way. It was nice meeting you and saving you, Izuku. I hope you follow the Witcher's Code and use your power for the benefit of others. Komi rolled her eyes and opened the door for Izuku. Well, I don't know anything about a Witcher's Code, but I will do my best. Also, thank you for telling me about all that stuff. It's nice to know what I am and that I served my purpose. Get going. I'm sure you have somewhere you need to be. As he left, Izuku made sure his sword did not strike the door frame. I do. Thank you for all you've done, Komi. I'll come by again. Izuku nodded to Komi and started down the street, his white hair blowing in the wind. As Komi saw Izuku go, he felt sorry for him. After closing her flower shop, Komi went back inside and started getting ready to plant more flowers. No one should have to be a witcher, although I guess it was his fate to be one. Izuku was making his way back up the mountain where he had previously been. Before returning to his flat, he wanted to retrieve his belongings that he had left there. The sun was directly overhead at midday. Izuku's white hair blew softly in the wind, exposing the dark green roots that would eventually turn white. Izuku, wondering what would happen to the murder scene he had previously discovered, stepped over loose gravel on the path and discovered the path he used to get to his campsite. He then started to walk up it. Izuku discovered his vagrant campsite while strolling and reflecting, and he noticed that nothing was amiss. Izuku picked up his blanket and put on his green jean jacket before making his way to his slender tent. Izuku removed his sword sheath while still clothed and placed it on his back for portability. Izuku started to walk away, but he stopped when he saw the silver sword on his back. Izuku's curiosity overcame him, and he turned around and started to walk back up the mountain to the location of the bloody campsite. In an attempt to reach the location where he recalled the campsite being set up, Izuku pushed tree branches aside and placed his feet on level ground as he made his way through the trees. Izuku eventually made it past the tree line and reached the clearing he remembered after continuing to walk along an unpaved path through the woods. Moving forward, Izuku noticed the opening in the middle of the clearing that descended into the cavern where the Foglers resided. Izuku's mind was filled with bitter memories of the fight, and he was shocked that he had defeated the Fogler without any witcher signs or skill. Izuku lost consciousness while staring at the hole, but his keen senses detected a branch snap, so he quickly spun around and took out his knife. Izuku gazed ferociously at the tree line, attempting to ascertain the source of that sound. Izuku scanned the trees, noticing branches shifting, and fixed his attention there as he positioned himself comfortably for battle. Izuku, however, was perplexed when he saw an elderly man with few wrinkles emerge from the trees. The elderly man had long gray hair, a red birthmark over his left eye that resembled a flame, and Hanafuda earrings with a rising sun that matched his eye's maroon hue. He covered the entire ensemble with a maroon haori and wore a cream-colored kimono over a black hakama. Then Izuku noticed the elderly man with the white socks and straw sandals. Izuku could only describe the elderly man as elegant, and his attire was spot on. Izuku did notice, though, that the old man's arms were not swinging. As Izuku watched the elderly man approach him calmly, he was alert and said, "He's carrying something." When the elderly man approached, he halted 3 meters from Izuku and gazed at him. Izuku could tell that the elderly man was assessing and evaluating him, even though his expression remained unchanged. After observing Izuku make minor stance adjustments, the elderly man then spoke up. Izuku stared at the elderly man, unsure of how to feel about him. "Have you seen a teenage boy with brown hair and maroon eyes around these parts? I was told someone looking like him came up on this mountain, and I haven't seen him come down." However, it appeared that responding to his query would be innocuous. Izuku relaxed a little, but the old man kept staring at him before posing another question. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description. But more importantly, why is an old man like you all the way up here? This spot isn't exactly easy to reach, and I don't think you should stay around here for very long." Izuku briefly froze at the old man's question because he knew something, and the old man appeared to notice his slight hesitation. "I was told he came up here with 2 others. Are you sure you haven't seen anyone up here?" Izuku asked. The old man reached into his haori, and Izuku saw the slightest indication that he had taken out a katana. "You know something, don't you?" Izuku asked. Izuku swallowed when he realized the elderly man was threatening him. "However, I am unable to read him at all. He seems to be in a state of near-permanent calm." Izuku raised his knife and slowly withdrew his hand, saying, "I need to de-escalate this." The old man looked at Izuku as if he were looking through him. "I do know something, but before I tell you, what is your relationship with him?" he asked. Izuku felt bad, but his stoic face remained unchanged. "He's like my son, although he has a few bad habits." Izuku swore he saw the old man's eyes get wet as he froze for the first time in their encounter. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but he's probably dead." The elderly man had one last question, but he looked down and became depressed. Izuku turned to the dejected old man and sheathed his knife, asking, "Are you sure? Do you know for a fact that he's dead?" Izuku motioned to the elderly man to follow him, then began to walk towards the campsite. "Follow me. Let me show you." The elderly man followed Izuku after his face stabilized. The old man's face did not convey his shock when they arrived at the bloody campsite. The old man saw the blood trails that led to the middle of the field, as well as the enormous bloodbath inside the tent. Does anything here look familiar to you? After kneeling and touching one of the blood trails, the elderly man turned to face the tent and observed what was within. Izuku went up to the elderly man and offered to help him up, saying, "Yes, that tent was his. I recognize it." After glancing at the hand, the elderly man grabbed it, allowing Izuku to surprise him with his strength and pull him to his feet. The elderly man asked Izuku another question as he got to his feet. Izuku looked down but responded, "How do you know that he's dead? I know you didn't kill him because you don't seem like the type. I killed the thing that took his and 2 others' lives." The old man followed the blood trails with his eyes and said, "Thank you for avenging his death. You killed a thing. What did you kill?" "I killed a monster, plain and simple, although it nearly killed me." Izuku looked puzzledly at the elderly man and said, "So that's where you got those injuries from?" The elderly man turned to Izuku and said, "How do you know I was injured? I didn't tell you, and you couldn't have seen it. Who are you?" "I can see it clearly, and I can tell that your injuries are from inexperience based on where they are." Izuku gazed at the elderly man with a stoic expression of surprise. "I know you're injured because of the way you carry yourself and the way your body moves." "Who are you, old man?" the elderly man asked with a charming smile and a radiant face, surprising Izuku with his emotional outburst as he had just been depressed. Izuku laughed when he said, "My name is Yoriichi Sugikuni. I am a regular swordsman." Yoriichi didn't have the demeanor of a regular swordsman. With a return to his solemn expression, Yoriichi asked Izuku another question. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Mr. Sugikuni." Izuku nodded, knowing the answer, and said, "Please call me Yoriichi. Being reminded that I'm old hurts the soul. You said you killed a monster. Are you certain that it was truly a monster?" "I confirmed that it wasn't an animal that did it. No animal would be confident enough to kill 3 people. Once I knew that it wasn't an animal, I pursued it, fearing it would strike again. I tracked it to a cave, where I found it and 3 victims. I proceeded to fight it, and I ended up killing it. At the time, I didn't know what I killed, and I was too hurt to think about it. But after I was saved and had a few things explained to me, I learnt that what I killed was called a Fogeler, an actual monster." Izuku turned to Yoriichi and asked how he knew about his lack of skill. "That sounds scary, and no doubt it was even worse considering you lack skill with a sword." Although Yoriichi's face stayed as motionless as a stone, he exuded a silly aura. "How do you know I wasn't skilled with a sword?" "The first tell was when you grabbed your knife instead of your sword. You're more comfortable with small blades. Your injuries also gave it away. Most of them are cuts along areas of the body that can be protected with a sword, which means you lack experience with a sword." Izuku giggled because Yoriichi was right. "You're correct in assuming I don't know how to use a sword. I was actually going to see if I could find someone to teach me, but then I was curious and came up here." Izuku assumed that Yoriichi was pointing to his katana when he said, "If you're looking for a teacher, I can teach you, although I'm afraid I don't use longswords." With a somewhat dejected expression on his stone face, Yoriichi gazed at the ground and said, "The fundamentals are still the fundamentals. However, don't you want to wait before offering me the opportunity to learn under you? You lost someone significant. Don't you want to grieve?" Izuku knew that Yoriichi could only bear so much grief and could tell he had experienced this pain before. "It does hurt to know that I'll never see him again, and he was a good kid, despite his flaws. I took him in and tried my best to take care of him and show him the way of the sword, but my teachings never stuck with him. He was skilled with a blade, but he neglected his training. I just wish our parting could have been on better terms. But if I get hung up on something like that, I won't be able to live the life my late wife would have wanted for me." Yoriichi looked up stonily as Izuku said, "My condolences for your loss. What was his name? And if you don't mind me asking, what happened between you two?" "His name was Miyaki Sugikuni, and what happened was that we fought. I asked him to take care of himself since he wanted to quit his sword training. I didn't mind him leaving. He had his own goals in life. Who was I to force him onto a path he didn't want? But I knew that he wanted me to fight for him. He didn't want to let me go. So he insulted me and called me a quirkless old man, then ran off, and I followed. And as I tailed him, I came upon this site and met you." Izuku looked at the ground in sorrow for the young man. "So you're quirkless? You didn't strike me as quirkless." "Well, I am. Most of the elderly are. I just happen to have great skill with a sword, that's all. Then there are people like you, who have quirks and can do more than others like me. And because of that, my skills with a sword aren't needed since quirks make up the difference." Izuku nodded his head in agreement. Izuku told Yoriichi that he wanted to learn how to wield a sword, and Yoriichi had a slight smile on his face. I wouldn't call what I have a quirk, but I guess it can be called one. And coming from someone with no sword experience, I think sword skills are essential for some people. Look at me. I want to learn how to wield a sword. So your talents can help me make up the difference and make me a better person. It makes me happy knowing that my honed techniques won't be forgotten so easily. I'm also glad that my faith in a bright future was not wasted. Izuku, if you want to learn about the sword, then I'll teach you, but first I need to gauge your strength. Draw your sword and attack any tree you want. Izuku smiled at Yoriichi as he made the offer to impart his knowledge. Izuku drew his sword and stepped in front of Yoriichi, saying, "Okay, I can do that." Yoriichi saw how shiny the sword was and took note of its peculiar complexion. Although Yoriichi thought the sword was beautiful in its own right, he thought it odd that it was covered in such a glossy metal. Izuku approached a tree and assumed a solid stance, raising his hands to strike the tree as Yoriichi considered his intriguing sword. "Sword, please don't break." Izuku was ready to strike. He inhaled deeply and flexed his arms. Izuku felt the edge of his sword touch the tree bark as he swung it as hard as he could, feeling confident. Izuku didn't stop there, though. He strengthened the sword and used all of his strength to cleave it through the bark. Yyyyyggggh. Izuku screamed as he pushed his sword through the tree. The silver sword edge exploded from the opposite side of the tree, scattering tree twigs and wood everywhere. Despite having a stony face, Yoriichi was shocked to see how much force Izuku put into his swing and was taken aback when he felled the tree in a single, vicious swing. Izuku's swing caused the tree to topple over and collapse, making a sound that suggested the wood was snapping and twisting. Izuku looked at his sword and was relieved that it did not take any damage, but he was a little let down that it lacked technique. Nice swing, but that was all strength and no technique. That would work for a brute, and you are no brute. Izuku was startled when Yoriichi suddenly materialized beside him. Izuku took a step back and observed Yoriichi approaching the area's thickest tree. Yoriichi stepped back and knocked on the wood, drawing his katana with the dexterity of a master. Izuku marveled at the splendor of the red katana, golden tuba, and hilt. It was a magnificent sword with no chips or imperfections on the blade. In addition, Izuku wanted to know why the word "slay" was engraved on the blade's side. Still wearing his stone face, Yoriichi was pleased that Izuku thought his sword was beautiful. "That's a beautiful sword. I hope the swing is just as pretty. But why does it have an engraving that says "slay" on its side?" he asked. To answer his query, he turned to face Izuku. Izuku could see the regret on Yoriichi's face as he said, "You have fought and slain a monster." "I have fought and slain many kinds of monsters, but they were monsters nonetheless. I had this sword engraved to remind me of all the battles I've fought." However, Izuku also observed Yoriichi's kindness. Izuku also pondered what kinds of conflicts he had engaged in that led him to label his adversaries as monsters. However, if Yoriichi was present, the winner was obvious. "Your skills must be sharp, and your war is clearly over. But don't worry, because now I'm here to help you forget about those battles. I still have my battles to fight, and your guidance would be appreciated." Yoriichi looked at Izuku with a grin. Yoriichi took his red katana in both hands and held it by his side before saying, "Then let me show you the guidance I can offer." Sheathing his sword, Izuku kept a close eye on Yoriichi, who was holding his katana at his side and concentrating on the tree. Yoriichi then barely moved, but he swung his sword as quickly as a bullet. With his improved vision, Izuku saw Yoriichi's blade cut through the dense tree with ease, as though it had never been there in the first place. The tree remained motionless as Yoriichi's blade emerged from the opposite side and was soon followed by a gust of wind that blew onto it. Yoriichi took a step back, sheathed his katana like a well-maintained machine, and bowed to the tree as Izuku watched in stunned silence. The tree toppled over and smashed onto the mountainside as Yoriichi took a step back. When Yoriichi finished, he approached Izuku, who was still stunned and motionless. However, Izuku gathered his thoughts and concluded that today had been enough to blow his mind. "That swing was perfect, and if anyone said you were quirkless, I'd call them a liar." To bring Izuku back to reality, Yoriichi remarked, "Flattery won't improve your swordplay." A tiny smile appeared on Yoriichi's stony face as she said, "I know, and I can tell that I have a long way to go before I can do that. You have the speed and strength, you just lack the skill, that's all. And that's what I intend to teach you." Izuku grinned at Yoriichi. Yoriichi also saw the eager expression on his face. Izuku gripped his sword and said, "Then let's get started, shall we?" Izuku was told to freeze by Yoriichi's stone face as he held out his hand to stop him. Izuku blushed in shame at having jumped the gun. Let's go get food, then we can go to my home, where I can teach you, and you can help me pack Miyaki's things. Izuku simply sighed in response to Yorichi's carefree departure before he realized it. I suppose that is the smart thing to do. Izuku glanced back at the tree Yorichi had felled and saw that it was a perfect cut. He's definitely an interesting character. Stone-faced, yet he feels plenty of emotions. Kind of like me. Plus, his skill is unreal. The stump's surface appeared to have been sanded by the katana slash, and the blade didn't lag behind. Izuku pondered whether he would ever reach that level of proficiency as he gazed down at his silver sword. Having gathered his thoughts, Izuku hurried off to join Yorichi, asking, "What the hell did I get myself into?" all the while reflecting on what transpired today. Izuku rushed through the forest to join Yorichi's path, then located him and started walking beside the quiet and modest elderly man. "I met an elder vampire, learned about what I am and what I killed, and now I'm getting trained by a quirkless sword master whose skill I can't even comprehend. I have a feeling that something exciting is about to happen."
So this was it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.